Hello, and welcome to a video that's been a long time coming and is very late now. And I could give all sorts of excuses for why it didn't come out, anywhere near when the season actually ended. Work's been busy, social life, blah, blah, blah. But really, the biggest factor is that this last season was just too good. There was just too many good shows that took me a long time to watch and took me a long time to articulate all the wonderful things I have to say about them. It was the God season. And I think we got to just dive in or else this video is going to take forever. We'll start off with the obligatory stuff I didn't watch. A relatively short list this time, thankfully. I really was able to dedicate myself to watching some good-ass anime this season. I didn't watch Blue Lock. I started it, I was enjoying it, and then something about the pacing just, wasn't, exactly enthralling me. So I thought I'll just read the manga instead, and now I'm caught up on the manga, and I'm having a blast. It is a really cool series. I think the fact that it was airing during the World Cup was just, such a blessing. You should check it out if you like sports series. I didn't watch the continuing new revived adaptation of Bleak, which covers the final arc. I was kind of interested because I wanted to see kind of how they modernized it, how they took this very classic franchise and made a new adaptation in a world where shonen anime looks a whole lot different than when they were first adapting Bleach. And I actually quite enjoy this final arc. I enjoy the big blood war against Yowatch and his alphabetized soldiers. I enjoyed it in the manga, even though it was, pretty wild. I thought I was a lot of scenes I was interested in seeing animated, but I just didn't get to it. My boyfriend was watching it. Maybe I'll watch it sometime. I don't know. The Urusei Yatsura remake is going to be 4 seasons long. It's 72 episodes or something insane. So I am watching this slowly. I'm pretty behind on it now. I do expect to watch all of it at some point. I'm really enjoying it, but I'll cover it when it ends or maybe sometime after that. Mushi Kaburi Hime is the Madhouse shoujo series about a princess who is obsessed with reading books. That has a lot of appeal to me. I love Madhouse, but I just didn't get to this. I heard it was kind of meh, so I don't know. I'm not really feeling like I missed out a ton. Kankole Season 2, I had just kind of a perverse interest in watching. I shouldn't say perverse, sorry. a kind of, grim pessimism, a morbid curiosity. Perverse is a word that suggests a lot of other stuff in this context. But I watched the first season of it years and years and years ago, and I didn't think it was very good at all. And I was kind of curious, how are they going to change it for the second season? Will they improve on any of the things that bugged me originally? Just sort of nostalgic. Kankole as a franchise has really kind of fallen off a lot of people's radar, so it was neat that they were making something new. But it wasn't a high priority to me. I didn't get to it. This one I actually did really want to watch. My Master Has No Tail, a story of a tanuki becoming a Rakugo performer. I love Rakugo, I love tanukis, the premise seemed great. I heard a lot of people say that it was pretty cute, pretty funny, but I don't know, again, I was watching so many friggin' shows. Yama no Susume Season 4 I didn't watch just because I'm not caught up, but this is an incredible franchise for fans of slice of life. I'm so glad they just keep adapting it. It's completely up my alley, 100% my cup of tea. I've really enjoyed what I've watched of it so far, but it's kind of a shame because I feel this would just be another solid proof that this season was beyond godlike to have, the 4th season of a show I was really enjoying also being on my plate, but I'm kind of relieved that it wasn't because again, I already watched so many things. Okay, let's get into the shows themselves, starting with the 2nd season of Pop Team Epic. I love Pop Team Epic. It's the ultimate shitpost, and it's back. The wonderfulest, amazingest, highest effortest, mind-blowingest shitpost is better than ever. There's been even more love and production value and care and just this sort of subliminal communication from otaku to otaku to make this one-of-a-kind masterpiece. The escalation and diversification of this nonsense out-surprised all surprises. Like, I was totally down for just another 12 episodes at the quality of the first season. I was also down for, like, they tried a lot of experiments with Gallon Dinosaur too. I was really curious to see how they would incorporate kind of the things they learned to do there into this franchise. So I did have, like, some expectations that, they're going to, like, step it up in some ways. But this blew my mind with how far they went. So what do we get? What kind of stuff did they do in this season? And I'll try to keep this, like, pretty spoiler free, but I just want to drive home just, like, the insane range of bits they did. Obara Sensei, who is one of the first, like, real geniuses of mecha anime, somebody who established so many of the tropes that we expect to see when two giant robots are fighting or transforming or just posing. He defined so many of those iconic poses, those iconic moments, and is still, like, an absolute top-tier genius at animating this sort of stuff. Delivers this really long, really substantial, amazingly, shockingly well-done parody of the very craft that he created. There's a really good kind of, like, Hollywood action parody, the train battles. They really leaned into doing, like, kind of Hollywood-style choreography, which I often complain about in anime. Like, I really don't like when anime choreographs their fight scenes as something that could be done in real life, and goes for, like, kind of the same shaky cam angles and stuff that Hollywood really likes in their fight scenes now. Like, it can be impressive, but it's just not that interesting to me. I want to see things that are, like, unique to anime. So it was, like, really funny that they parodied this style, and they in turn sort of parodied anime that kind of go for this look. But I think they did, like, a way better job than most of the sincere attempts at doing Hollywood-style choreography I've seen in pretty much any show. This was a segment I really, really enjoyed. It starts as, like, an English lesson with, like, very basic grammatical sentences, and then evolves into this amazing parody of, like, 90s and 80s dark fantasy series, both in the West and Japanese. With the legendary Shining Soldier, and it becomes this, like, weird song, this, like, chant that they're singing. It's just such a perfect example of this kind of, like, escalation into nonsense that they're so good at. Near the end, there's this really bizarrely sincere documentary about the two of them as just comedians in this really lovely, charming art style. And, like, the whole time you're waiting for the twist, you're waiting for the subversion. But, spoiler alert, it just doesn't happen. You just see a lovely little slice of their lives as they reminisce about their careers until this point. Tons of other stuff, too. There's a visual novel section. There's a long segment where they, parody Dora the Explorer. There's, like, a Fortnite parody, nature documentaries, the 80s traditional battling punk type series. All parodied, all with, like, very unique little twists and charm points, but always with such, like, a love for the thing that they're pastiching. And then, of course, an entire fake Sentai show shot completely in live action with all of the great Tokubetsu special effects that you'd expect to see from, like, a real Sentai show. And by the end of it, again, it was one of those things where you're just kind of, like, waiting for the twist. And there are some twists, but it's played so straight that it made me appreciate, like, how much I would actually really enjoy Sentai shows if I got into that. I know that it's, like, a whole medium and genre in and of itself that has dedicated fans spanning decades. It's a scene that's always kind of, like, interested me, but always more, like, academically, I guess, that I'm like, yeah, it's kind of neat that this culture exists, but I don't really care to watch it. After seeing this fake Sentai show that they made and just really getting into it in the span of this one parody, I'm like, nah, you know what? I would be a Sentai fan. And then, of course, all of this is interspersed by their normal, silly, tiny little mini gags with all their deranged, hallucinatory addictiveness and many styles. I'm just always so shocked at how they can take, like, the simplest premise and just through escalation and repetition and this sort of bend towards insanity, you end up with something that feels almost, like, addictive, that you just want it to keep going for, like, another 10 minutes, just seeing the same variations, the same escalations. And, of course, one of the main gimmicks, I guess, of the show is that each episode, the main characters, Popiko and Pipimi, are played by really legendary VAs, usually reprising a connection that they've had before with like the other VA, like the VAs for like Solid Snake and Raiden are one pair, or Majima and the main dude in Yakuza, I can't think of his name, and Haruhi and Nagato, and then they do two sets. They do two men and two women, re-showing the show, sometimes with like pretty major variations. There's just like so many like little Easter eggs and references that if you really dive into the lore of like who's working on the show in terms of the VAs and the animators and all the homages and stuff, it's just packed to the gills with like cute little references. And what I like, not even so much as the references, but just like the fun it must have been for these VAs especially to come back into the studio with someone that they maybe haven't worked with since their like legendary collaboration, and just really revel in that and make all these jokes and references and riff and freestyle. And I don't know, it's so fun. It's so goofy. And of course, the return of Hell Shake Yano in one of my favorite anime episodes of anything in the entire past year. Boo are geniuses. If you don't watch anything else in the show, please watch Hell Shake Yano. I will show it to you in person if we have such a relationship. I'd love to watch it again and again and see people's reactions. It's just so much fun. Okay. And so much more. I'm barely scratching the surface of all the craziness they packed into this season. What I realized when thinking about this show and trying to draw some sort of reference point to some other media somewhere is that this is basically the anime version of Tim and Eric Awesome Show Great Job. I finally realized that is the show that is like structurally and tonally and thematically most similar to it. So let's break down why. First off, semi-post-ironic usage of superlatives in the title. Epic show, awesome show. Skits that take place in disparate but interfering inconsistent layers of reality and in media. And what I mean by this, the most typical example is like, there's a show within a show. Tim and Eric does this all the time. Pop Team Epic does this all the time. But then the layers of reality and show become very inconsistent and twisted, and you never really know. And it's done, without like drawing attention to it, such that you only really realize, hey, wait, these characters aren't actually supposed to be interfering. When it's already kind of too late and you've been brought into this kind of chaos. Recurring bits and characters that get subverted and recombined. You set up a character in one bit, and then many episodes later, they show up in like this really bizarre new context. Hilarious, always fun. I don't know. It like builds up a sort of format that you expect, and then subverts that or recombines that in a way that's like really thrilling. Parodies that delight in immaculately mirroring their subject while being fundamentally weird. So many examples of this in both shows, something that seems very straight up, oh, it's a parody of this movie or it's a parody of this genre. But then the weird elements just keep piling onto it until the fact that it's so on point in terms of, say, like the dialogue or the cinematography becomes so secondary to just kind of the absurdity that's been piled on top of it. And parodies that highlight cultural fringes, things dream remembered by particular audiences. Like, Tim and Eric isn't generally parodying mainstream things, right? They're parodying, like, public access television or really weird B movies or, bizarre roadside attractions. And similarly, Pop Team Epic isn't always parodying like the most popular anime genres, although it does some of that too. But instead just kind of like weird media that like people who are really otaku core that have dived into the history of anime will get that they're actually like putting a spotlight on some really obscure kind of side note type anime instead of, always just kind of like hitting the main things. Abrasive elements and elements that are so sublimely high quality that they become abrasive. And here, it was kind of like I was talking before, that when they have these little gags, they just keep like escalating them and iterating them until they become like maddeningly addictive. I think a lot of that comes from the fact that they have elements that are like shockingly high quality, like a song that really is that catchy. But it's like drilled into you in such a way that like the catchiness starts to become manic. And I think Tim and Eric's very good at this too. Extremely talented, legendary artists and actors brought in for bizarre and inane tasks. This one really speaks for itself. I actually think the laundry list of guests that Tim and Eric somehow managed to get, and the similar list of just extremely famous anime people that showed up in Pop Team Epic are pretty comparable. I think you can kind of go point by point and each time ask, how the hell did they get this person? This idea of like spiraling into mimetic chaos, we've talked about this before, that it kind of starts with some premise, some parody, some joke, and then the bit just sort of like degrades more and more until it becomes this like weird self-referential looping performance of itself. I'm sure you can think of many examples where like a little phrase just starts being repeated back and forth in this maddening intensity. Funny on a wide range of comedy, from just straight up slapstick that's funny on the level of being slapstick, to surreality, to very uncomfortable cringy moments, to just straight up bizarre puns and wordplay, and then looping back around before you can even like catch your breath. There's also a tall one with dark hair and a shorter one with light hair. So like Tim and Eric, awesome show, great job. This show isn't for everyone. And it's not even really for fans of Tim and Eric necessarily, right? Like, even though I listed all these ways in which they're similar, it's the actual like material itself is so wildly different that I think it's pretty rare for one sense of humor to encompass both. Really, it's for the equivalent people that grew up watching anime and have the same kind of cultural foundations with anime. But for the people that it's for us lucky few that can tolerate and enjoy this madness, this is a masterpiece. I'm happy to give this one a 9.5 out of 10. I think it's just so packed full of sheer joy. I mean, it's hard to kind of score it even higher than this because, you know, there's a whole dimension of kind of like emotional resonance that isn't tapped into so much. But I think on like a meta level, just thinking about how much love went into something that's so stupid and so irreverent and so niche is something that brings me a lot of like awe and happiness too. All right, moving on to Akiba Maid War. This one, when I first heard about it, you know, when I do my what show should I watch next season video, I'm pretty sure we glossed over this one pretty quickly. Reading the AniChart entry did not interest me in the slightest. And even after I watched episode 1, I was like, okay, I get it. They're maids, but they're doing like Yakuza stuff. But this ended up being one of the shows we chose to watch in my anime club, which I mostly kept up with last season. People were interested in it. It seemed like a nice kind of diversity role compared to some of the other shows we were watching. And I'm actually pretty glad that we chose this and I stuck with it. So, you know, it is just Yakuza maids, but there's a lot to being in the Yakuza. In the start of the series, we're treated to this really nice tour of the Tokyo underbelly. Every episode is very distinctly themed into one sort of slice of the underworld. Illegal casinos, underground boxing, illicit dealing of, in this case, bootleg anime figures. It's just really fun to see like the otaku version of all these like very standard settings. And then after you've kind of like established this world and established the characters with these more episodic things, it opens up to a much larger, way more complex than I anticipated mafioso drama with these multi-generational grudges of different Yakuza maid factions battling back and forth. The early episodic stuff was fun. It had nice world building. As I said, it's just really funny to see how they twist these things into like otaku versions. And the later, larger sagas were pretty engrossing. There was really good twists, a lot of stuff I did not see coming at all. The histories are like very well woven in, that you understand characters have shady pasts and then they're revealed piecemeal in a way that's like really satisfying but doesn't feel too subversive or too twist heavy. Really kind of cathartic payoffs to understand, like this is the relationship those two had. And just like there's a lot more to being in the Yakuza, there was a lot more to being a maid than I expected from the series too. It's not just kind of like a sheer veneer, like not just a thin aesthetic where they color everything maid color or whatever, but instead they really address like what does it mean to be a maid. And I liked too that it wasn't just sort of like this is a bizarre alternate universe where all the maids engage in these Yakuza activities. There's wars between maid cafes or shooting each other up, but this conceit, this premise, is absurd to the characters in the series too. They do address this. They do question and challenge, why are we killing each other in the streets? Is this really what being a maid is all about? As the more progressive maids fight to end the cycle of violence, there's a lot of exploration of what being a maid is supposed to be. And it's actually kind of an interesting question. Like, you look at these maid cafes, this is an institution in Akiba for decades now and has spread it to like a worldwide phenomenon. What exactly is the role these people are playing? Like, what is the character of being a maid in a maid cafe? And it's kind of neat. But in the end, this kind of contrast, it's sort of played in the same way that a lot of like Yakuza stories and films and stuff will be like, but there is like a noble, heroic, benevolent, good Yakuza that's actually fighting on the side of the common person and goes up against the bad Yakuza and the corrupt police and all of that. They have an even more now idealized role of like a good maid that stands up for what's right and doesn't fall into this petty back and forth revenge and isn't unnecessarily violent and stuff. And I guess this is kind of like begins to highlight something that's really weird to me about this series. What the heck is the tone of this series supposed to be? Because the whole thing is basically a joke. It never really strays too far from like being a joke of these girls work at a maid cafe, but they're gunning each other down. Even in the most dramatic scenes, there's always like silly little maid puns and stuff, and they always talk in the language of their home cafe. So our main characters are from like a pig-themed cafe, and they're always saying "buta" at the end of their sentences and making pig puns and stuff. And it's just kind of like, what? Like, are we expected to take this seriously? Because everything does have like a very comedic timing too. Some of the characters are just walking punchlines. They never really get a substantial role outside of just being, I want to say comedic relief, but again, it's just all comedy to varying extents. But then you're also definitely asked to take it seriously. Like, the violence is no joke. It's often delivered very brutally with lots of blood, lots of suffering, seeing characters get shot and then writhe around in the street as they're bleeding to death. And the complexity of the plot requires, some focus. It expects you to pay attention and anticipate based on the roles and to kind of see the build up to major climaxes happening and understand the ramifications of, if this character turns against that character, that means that this other faction is going to turn against them. Like, you're not asked to kind of treat these elements as a joke as well. And we're definitely supposed to be endeared to the characters. Their sad pasts are meant to be sad. Their weaknesses are supposed to be, something that we root for them to overcome. We want to see their growth. We're supposed to be moved by their heroic sacrifices. But at the same time, the fact that it's always like comedic, I thought maybe we would end up with some real TK levels of despair. And if you don't know, TK is a doujinshi artist who you're better off not investigating. He makes like these really brutally depressing parody doujinshi, taking often some otherwise totally innocent and cheerful slice of life series, and then just giving like a brutally exhaustive breakdown of the characters' psychologies and stuff. And it has the same sort of tone where you're kind of forced to take it seriously just due to the gravity of everything happening. But it's all just so absurd, and they don't kind of shy away from the absurdity of it being, the K-On! Characters going through all of this. So I started getting some like really deep, bad vibes from this series. And I thought, is this what it's going to become? As kind of like a TK type of despair. In the OP, one of the maids' faces is like blurred out, and something about that was like a huge siren in my head of like, this is going to get heavy. And then some stuff did kind of stray into that territory. The whole arc of Ranko's birthday, I don't even want to get into it, or some of the threats of torture, the perilous situations they get put into. It gets like really heavy, like uncomfortably heavy. But then they're never more than like 10 minutes away from some really goofy scene, some maid jokes, a heartwarming scene where they really show each other their camaraderie, or just some really over-the-top, like, gory scene that really revels in excessive violence. And then you're kind of, you lose that, like, thread to something deeper and heavier, and again, you're just kind of adrift, and you're thinking, how am I supposed to treat this series? And I think in the end, like, maybe my biggest issue is that they kind of hype up this idea of, like, maid nobility, this idea of we can become better maids. This is what being a maid is all about. It's not about killing, it's just about serving. But like, I have a lot of beefs with that concept too. I don't think these maid cafes are good. I think they're quite exploitive, and often they treat their staff really terribly and put them in dangerous situations where they're liable to get stalked and harassed and even worse. And so I it's just like hard for me to resonate with maybe the only like coherent message of this series is that it's better to be a maid and not kill each other than kill each other. But it's like, is that such a great achievement that you get to live peacefully as a maid? I don't know. The result is something that I found interesting. I found it fun. I was compelled by it, but I was never moved by it. I was never really put into like a strong emotional state because of it. And for all of that, I would give it, a solid 8 out of 10. It's nice. It's fun, but it's lacking something. All right, next we're going to talk about Cyberpunk Edgerunners. It's Trigger time. It's the latest Trigger show. I'll watch pretty much anything Studio Trigger puts out. One of my favorite studios of all time. And honestly, though, this was like borderline. I just said, I'll watch anything Trigger puts out, but this put that to the test because there were so many other shows I wanted to watch. This had already just all come out on Netflix. I had heard really good things about it from like a wide variety of people. But I was like, I don't know. I don't care about this game at all. I don't care about Cyberpunk, the franchise or whatever. So I was like, am I going to watch an anime made to like promote it and tie into it or whatever? But how did I doubt Trigger? This series goes so hard. It goes hard and then it goes even harder. It's an excellently executed short series. They do such a good job over the 10 episodes, just like escalating and escalating. The burdens the characters are facing get heavier and heavier, and it's not shrugged off. It's not swept under the rug, but you really feel the growing suffering after all the shit they go through. And all of this is reflected so wonderfully in Trigger's production. You feel the speed, the power. The explosions get faster and punchier and explodier. It just escalates so well in every single way that by the end, it's become this like super superlative, over the top, kinetic fest of violence and explosions. And I think probably the series ended up very, very popular. And I think a lot of the people that picked it up wouldn't be able to handle the state that it gets to at the end had they not so smoothly built up to it. Accumulated pain in the character is reflected in some of Trigger's most detailed and subtle character animation yet. This is one spot I really want to highlight. Trigger I think really stepped up in a lot of ways, but one area that I know the Western audience like really demands is like kind of a more subtle performance from the characters. And I think Trigger did an amazing job bringing that out in a way that we don't usually see from them. Maybe in like Gridman, but generally speaking, they're much more about the over-the-top, goofy character acting. And here I was impressed with how restrained and detailed they went with it. But it doesn't go absurdly hard. Compared to the escalation in a lot of Trigger series, we get something that's a lot more restrained. Usually Trigger, the way they escalate their stories is like a kind of a ramp and then an exponential and then like an asymptote that just disappears as the series ends. Whereas here, it's just like a nice, smooth ramping up over 10 episodes. It's a nice, restrained story. And I like this because a lot of trigger shows at the very end, they go a little too off the rails for me. And I sometimes get a little weary of them suddenly shifting whatever we've been focusing on into like this totally apocalyptic, the entire world depends on this final mega battle. I think this has like a much nicer restrained scope for me. And I think it also very much emphasizes the setting, how overwhelming the terror of society is, that our characters who are suffering so much, that are fighting so hard, in the end can do very little. All of this story just kind of revolves around like one feud between corporations over one piece of technology that our characters get caught up in. But there's no suggestion at any time that no matter what our characters do, they're ever going to make any impact on either of those two corporations or the overall power structures in their world or the way people are treated in general. Like, I think it really does a good job emphasizing how huge and domineering society is. And so talking about the production a little bit more, it is very, very extreme. I said the word explosion like 8 times already, but it's restrained for Trigger. So they go all out with like the action sakuga, the explosions, the choreography of the fights and shootouts and stuff, and it's great. It's some of the best stuff they've ever done in this mode, I think. Like, they're just getting better and better at shooting that kind of action sequence and really making it feel tense and kinetic and explosive. But it really makes me miss very acutely their quirky side, which is sprinkled in here, but very sparsely. Like, there's a few kind of moments of downtime where you see characters do kind of more like wacky animation and stuff. There's some comedic moments where stuff gets really exaggerated, but it's quite sparse. There's no baseball episode, for example. In BNA, which was their previous kind of major series, there was a whole episode about the characters just playing baseball, which was hilarious and extremely goofy and had some of the best kind of over-the-top gag animation I've seen. I think they didn't want to make it too goofy for like a mainstream audience. I think there was like a lot of concessions made because they knew a lot of non-anime watchers or just fans of the series or just like Netflix watchers were going to be seeing this. And I think that's fine because this relatively traditional production is offset by the fact that the world itself is like very, very interesting and really embodies, I think, what people like about Cyberpunk. So many details, so many little background characters, stuff like seeing the interfaces and the UIs of the futuristic technology. It's just so rich. It's so enjoyable. Like, I just love stuff like that. It's why I love the works of Issa so much. And this series is just packed every scene with that. And it's a really awesome combination where there's stuff in the future that makes you think, wow, cool, like that technology is so neat. And then also, scary. These people have almost no agency or comforts whatsoever. They've been so crushed by hypercapitalism. And then also so many things that just make you go, oh, that's gross. You're really going to stick that in your eye socket? Bruh. And I think it's those trifecta that really make up Cyberpunk, which was so transformational to anime. To an entire era of anime and to its impact in the West with stuff like Ghost in the Shell, Akira. There's a lot of debates about whether or not Akira's cyberpunk. It's close enough. It hits the wow, cool, scary, gross trifecta. So to see this return like full circle after those movies had so much impact on like Western cyberpunk popularity, kind of building off stuff like Blade Runner to really establish this mode in the West. And then now the West making this game, which in turn inspires this excellent anime. It's like just really neat, that kind of circular influence. The video game, again, seems very boring to me. Watching the series did nothing to make me want to play it. It's maybe a little unfortunate pit stop in this cycle, but, whatever. I did remember at one point I was watching this, and it was something about like the equipping different cybernetic parts or something. I was like, well, this would make a cool video game. And then I remembered. I was like, oh, right. But yeah, I think overall, like, I really did love this series. I just wish it was longer and had less stuff happening. and more baseball episodes. I wish it was more just like slice of life. I wish there was more non-crisis, non-combat action scenes and more just kind of like exploring the world. Because there was some of that stuff in it, and those were the scenes that really made me love the series. But still really, really good. I think it deserves all of its popularity, and I hope that people watching this learn to love like the art of action Sakuga and stuff, and seek out more Trigger series and more other really great stuff. Oh, I thought that was it. I have one more slide on this show. Oh, yeah. So the other thing we're discussing with this, it's so content warning core. There's so much violence, blood flying everywhere, limbs getting mutilated, heads exploding. There's so much nudity. There's no dongs, because they're cowards, but you see lots of boobs. It's pretty nice. And so much just like fetishy shit, you know? It's not usually a focus, more just kind of like this implication. But the implication is enough. Like, you know that this society is just saturated with all sorts of really freaky sexual things. And so many drugs. You know, whether it's the antipsychosis meds that they're taking to offset how much their nervous system is getting fucked up by all this stuff, or just kind of recreational drugs. You always get this sense of characters just kind of swimming in and out of sobriety. Just a total altered state kind of saturates the entire series. And it kicks so much ass. I love it. Finally, it's taken a long time, but I'm starting to become convinced that the Netflixification of anime is not at all a bad thing. There's aspects of it that still bug me, of course, but the fact that they're able to produce stuff like this, kind of like the golden era of OVAs in the 90s, where there's little to no restrictions on the content itself, and they can tell these gory, sexy stories, is exciting. And this is, you know, proof enough that it can produce masterpieces. So what can we say about this kinetic ecstasy of violence and degeneracy? I have mixed opinions, I think, in general, on shows that are so excessive. Sometimes I love it. Sometimes I just hate it. And I can't really explain what delineates those two. I think that's like a much bigger conversation, especially kind of like in instances where I didn't like it. Why didn't I like it? But we can examine at least why this was such a success for me here. First off, it's very aestheticized. You know, all this blood flying around. It's not just for the sake of gnarliness, but also just it highlights how punchy the direction is, how explosive things are, just the Sakuga in general, the movement. It's not trivialized either. I really appreciated that as David starts to kill people, his body count ticks up, and you can see that it's like heavily felt. That people, you know, appreciate the fact that they're committing these acts of violence. And when they don't, when they've become desensitized to it, that in itself is also like characterization. That in itself contributes to a sense of the setting. And also, this I think just really drives home like how shitty the world is in this series, right? Shit sucks in 2077. And the fact that you can just randomly die or suffer immensely and just become mutilated in some random shootout really drives it home. And I think without the brutality and focus on this violence, you wouldn't really experience that as much. Honestly, though, as much as I appreciate this kind of look at, wow, like the hyper-capitalist future sucks, people's rights are just going to continue to be stripped away, people's agency will become like zero, everything's going to be ruled over by corporations. All that's like pretty based, but I I think that's like almost naive. I think by 2077 things are going to be like way worse than they are in this series. That's another subject that's way too big to get into. This video is taking long enough as is. All right, this one I'd give it an 8.5. Very fun, very exciting. It made me really miss, though, a lot of the stuff that I really love Trigger for. But I can appreciate that it was made for like a larger audience, and I'm really happy that that larger audience is jumping into it. Okay, Chainsaw Man time. This is going to be a big one. It's here. This was probably the most anticipated show of last year. The MAPPA adaptation of Chainsaw Man, this overwhelming success of a manga that grew from like a cult following to just being one of the most talked about series in general. And it's one of my favorite shonen series recently too. I got really into Chainsaw Man around when the first kind of major saga of it ended, which was, I guess, like 2-ish years ago. So yeah, I was pretty curious about this. I was very excited because I like MAPPA too. I think generally they do really good work. And the Jujutsu Kaisen adaptation that they made also, I think, around 2 years ago, I was pretty impressed by it. It had a lot of the qualities that I would have wanted in a Chainsaw Man adaptation. So my hopes were very high going into this. I was just so excited to see this insane, unique, mind-blowing series unleashed onto the mainstream. I wanted this to be a hit. I wanted a ton of people to learn about this series because of the anime. So there's a little to the hype. Sort of no. The production is pretty plain. I talked about this before. Anime that's shot in kind of like a live-action Hollywood cinematography style. This definitely fits into that. It's definitely a lot of care and consideration, but nothing like super explosively creative, nothing that feels uniquely anime. The fight scenes especially reflect this. This was something that was a huge controversy when the series first aired, that there's a lot of CGI usage in the fight scenes. And I think people are way too reactionary about CGI. They just freak out as soon as they see it. I think because kind of if you're like still learning about anime, you might kind of inherit this like checklist of things that are good or bad. And, like hand-drawn is good and CGI is bad. I could complain about this for a long time, but I think the CGI usage is fine for what they're going for, because they really want to liberate the camera and they want to increase the speed and the pace, and kind of focus in on like the choreography and stuff like that, and make it less about like sakuga and less about like abstract motion. Again, just sort of fitting into like a more Hollywood style of action direction. The pacing, I think, also shifted quite a bit from the manga to optimize itself around binge watching, kind of presupposing that the majority of the fans and the majority of the watching isn't necessarily going to happen on a week-by-week basis with most anime, but sort of anticipating this more modern audience that loves to binge watch, that will wait for a season to finish and then watch the whole thing. So it's a feeling of a one assumed complete experience, rather than the manga, which I think did such an amazing job of like hooking you with every single chapter into reading the next. Here they kind of change up the pacing, change up their understanding of like what's going to hook you, and assume that if you're kind of on board by the premise, you're just going to watch the whole thing at once. People were mad about this. I haven't really dug into this too much, but I know there was like a petition through Japanese Twitter to remake the series with a different director. A lot of people were very, very mad. And not just about the CGI thing. Like I saw some Western fans complain about that. But the Japanese fans seem to be most upset by like the pacing, which certainly is very, very different. So in all, I was like a bit overwhelmed. I would say as an anime, this is not insane, unique, mind-blowing like the manga was. Okay, but I don't want to leave it at that. This isn't just about what I thought of it. I want to kind of get into why I think it is the way it is. And like Cyberpunk, I think this was one where they, from the start, were anticipating a large Western audience. They wanted to reach a brand new demographic that wasn't reading the manga already. So what this adaptation reminded me most of stylistically was smart film. This is a term I learned in film class, and then when I was like, I should make sure I remember this correctly, I started Googling all over the place, and I could not find any reference to it, and then maybe this was all just a hallucination in my undergrad. But anyways, I'm pretty sure I learned about this concept of a smart film. So basically, smart films are mid-budget movies of the 90s, 2000s that were very like tightly shot, had a lot of like clever dialogue and banter, focused a lot on sequence direction versus like scene direction, expected a lot of the audience in terms of understanding the plot, understanding what the heck is going on, pushed adult themes and languages, swearing unrelentingly, had action that didn't really feel like spectacle, but focused more on like the choreography and the performance of the action, that you're like, whoa, these are such talented people, rather than, damn, that special effects budget. Had genre elements, like often they had a sci-fi premise or horror elements or something, but it was much more focused on like the human drama. And I'm sure you can think of some movies that fit the bill. I don't want to go on at length just naming movies from the 90s, but a lot of these have become like really cult classics. A lot of these are, for better or worse, what you think of when you think of like film bro type movies. They had a big cultural impact. And I feel like, and yeah, this also overlapped with a lot of the first big prestige TV, your early HBO classics. We're also kind of cut from the same cloth. We're focusing on the same audience. And not coincidentally, in the Chainsaw Man OP, a lot of people were really excited that they were making movie references. And pretty much all the movie references they make is this genre of smart film, right? So I think this points to a very deliberate intent to connect with the audience of smart films. Either the people that were actually watching them contemporarily in the 90s and 2000s, or I think even more so, a type of like media literate millennial or zoomer who went back and watched these like kind of now classic films, you know, your Fight Clubs, your Coen Brothers movies, your Tarantino's, your Matrices. They're aiming for those people, I think, and they're very deliberately signaling this intent. So these are people that generally probably don't like anime that much, probably aren't habitual anime watchers like me, and they probably have very certain ideas of what anime is like that may contribute to them not being interested. When they see this, they go, oh, this isn't like other anime. This is like cool stuff that I like. This is like those movies that I'm into. And that opens them up conceptually to a lot of other stuff that they may kind of associate with more stereotypical anime. You know, I'm gonna hunt devils. I'm lusting to touch boobs. There's gore. There's lore. They think, oh, okay, well, this isn't like another anime though. Even though these things I kind of expect to see from anime are major elements, they must be like self-aware in doing these, or something like that. They're like absolved because they've signaled to me that we're on the same page. So the manga as well kind of had the same type of signaling. So this is embarrassing to admit, but I had actually not heard of Fujimoto Sensei before Chainsaw Man. I had heard of like Fire Punch and stuff, but they didn't really make any impression on me. I never read any of his work. So when I saw Chainsaw Man debut, I was like, okay, this looks silly, it looks edgy, it's probably some over-the-top gore fest. Then I was recommended it directly, which was when, you know, I watched it or read it, and I was like, damn, this is good. This is really good. And just as much as the plot really shocked me with the directions it went, the twists, the subversions, what really drew me in from almost page one was the usage of the medium of manga itself. Stuff like the way Fujimoto just does paneling, the way they do kind of twists across page turns, understanding like the shock of turning the page, understanding the page as a whole, as a piece of art and not just the sequence of panels. Building, as I said before, they just did such an amazing job week by week hooking you into the next chapter, but then also kind of subverting the normal twists you would expect from the weekly magazine format. I was immediately struck that this wasn't just another Weekly Shonen Jump Battle Shonen series, as I expected it to be. And, you know, there's nothing wrong with the Weekly Shonen Jump Battle Shonen series. I read, like, 5 of them. Maybe I would read this one, too. I don't know. Maybe I wouldn't. It wasn't a high priority. I had a sense of, oh, I have enough of those. I, like, understand what they are. It signaled, though, that this was something from the world of more dynamic, more modern manga, series that I sought out from other magazines, from other genres, in other contexts. In other words, cool stuff that I like. So, you know, as I said, it was like a very kind of cutting-edge manga. Chainsaw joke? I don't know. So you'd think, oh, I should expect the anime to be like similarly cutting edge, right? But the intent is slightly different. the manga wanted to pull an audience of people more invested in manga to say, you should check this out if you're a habitual manga reader and you're impressed with this sort of thing. The anime, though, wanted to pull an audience that otherwise is uninvested in anime. So the result of this, and I think the reason why the series has gotten so much backlash and so much controversy, and then also so much praise and so much love from audiences that would otherwise not even interact or may not even be divided, is because of this bizarre thing of like setting the anime and the manga up to signal to different audiences. It's a 4-way mashup of expectations and outcomes. And just kind of following the discourse around the series has been really, really entertaining. Okay, so let's get to the positives. I hope that was interesting. I hope that was understandable, but it just was very neat to me the way they, I think, quite successfully signal to this entirely new audience that, hey, this is something you should be interested in. This isn't like other anime. But let's just praise it a bit. So the production, you know, as I said, wasn't really anime as anime. It was very live action style. It was still good. The VA's performances were great. They brought out the extreme personalities of the characters in a way that made them instantly iconic. Comedic timing and micro-pacing within scenes was very, very on point. As I said, the overall pacing kind of disappointed me, but like the way they built up like specific moments and stuff I thought was really, really good. The fight scenes, again, kind of Hollywood CG style, did really succeed as Hollywood CG. Like, they were a lot more interesting to me than anything I've seen in like a Marvel movie. All sorts of really awesome angles and bursts of speed, intricate choreography, stuff that really took advantage of the fact that it was CG. Soundtrack was killer, all sorts of semi-abrasive elements. The tension was so high, it was like gripping, haunting. The direction, I think, really does highlight a lot of the stuff that made smart film such a movement. And they do a really good job bringing that to anime. Just all sorts of very clever shots, like POV shots, long dynamic shots, like tracking shots, you know, the sort of stuff where action directors would show off, there's no cuts at all in this fight scene. But really inventive angles, perspectives, situating locations with like hyper close-ups or just kind of like an odd angle that makes you reflect on a character's perspective or something. All these things that people have praised this era of filmmaking at length for, I think they really did do a good job bringing here. And they had 12 different endings. Every episode has a different ending, and they're all like amazing. The music, the production style, just the raw experimentation they went with. So many styles parodied. The 80s style one just makes me like giddy. So many homages, and then just straight up like new aesthetic styles they invented. The music cut across all sorts of genres. It was bold, experimental animation, huge Sakuga moments, charactery, the way they presented the characters through all these different iconifications and imaginary reimaginations of them and stuff. It really was like everything I wanted from anime, right? Like the EDs kind of spoke to this like super bold Shaft style of production that honestly I would have loved the entire show to have. And my friend who's actually an animator, while we were watching this in Anime Club, said, "Don't you wish the whole show was like this?" to me when I was praising the ED. And you know what? It's true, I do. But they honestly would not have been able to reach anywhere near the audience this show has had if they went like that. I think this sort of smart style was very smart in attracting the sort of people they wanted to attract. So why is this series so good, though? We've been talking exclusively about how the adaptation handled things. With this kind of unspoken assumption that the original story is so good that as long as they do it right, as long as they make an adaptation that lives up to it, it would just be this undeniable masterpiece. And maybe you're wondering at this point, like, since when do I care about the expanded audience of an adaptation? That doesn't sound like me. Why do I care about normies? Why wouldn't I just want an adaptation that really drills into the existing fan base and just gives them something mind-blowing, right? or at least somebody who's totally invested into anime and could really appreciate an experimental production. Shouldn't be aiming for that. But in this case, the story is so good. The original series is so sweet. I just want to be able to talk to more people about Chainsaw Man. So much that I'm okay with an adaptation that's kind of strategic to reach those audiences. I want to see normies talk about this. I want to make this a phenomenon. I want to hear how all these people interpret the characters and speculate on the lore. And I just love this series that much. This is the only time I'll ever say this. It's some combination of like how much I like it and how feasible it seems for all these sorts of people to get into it leads to this unprecedented admitting of defeat. Let the normies have it. I want to keep everything else, but let the normies have this. So why is it so good? And keep in mind that I still have to cover 7 more shows. We're almost an hour into this video, so I'll try to keep this brief. My friend sent me this article that shows how Chainsaw Man is basically if you took Evangelion and you swapped out the main characters with Beavis and Butthead. And that's true. and it's 100% accurate, and that's hilarious. And if that doesn't sound like the best show you've ever heard of, then I don't know what more to tell you. The world building, I would say, falls under the loose category in my little taxonomy of how series like this do world building. If you want to understand what I mean by that, I have an Osama ranking review somewhere on this channel that gets into it. But basically, I'm really enamored by shows that world build in this way, and I find them really compelling, and I think this is one of the best examples. The plot twists to pull you in, but never feels contrived or desperate or routine. I don't even know where to start kind of praising and examining how the story is written, Chainsaw Man as a whole, but there's something like very uniquely engrossing about it. I don't know. I don't know what to tell you. Just watch it. I don't know who's watching this, but watch this. Instead, almost. I'm sure you're looking at the runtime of this video, and there's a lot left. You could probably get in another 3 episodes of Chainsaw Man instead. No, I'm just kidding. Please keep watching this. I put a lot of work into it. Overall, it's just a masterpiece of storytelling that pushes genres I love forward once more. I think it's a great revolution in shonen storytelling that will influence shonen battle series authors for decades to come. So I'm happy to give this a 9. As much as I love this series, as much as I loved aspects of this, it doesn't really succeed to me as an anime well enough to rate it any higher. But it's good, and as I said, if you're not that into anime, it's still something that I think is like really enjoyable and really appreciable. Okay, let's talk about Spy Family Season 2. Moving on to an excellent show that is very much anime as anime, not kind of a live action styled anime or anything like that. Let's model this briefly as a contrast to Chainsaw Man. Both started as very popular, very acclaimed manga, both in Weekly Shonen Jump, that then were given major studio adaptations that I'm sure everyone involved were like, we got to knock it out of the park with this. This property is just so hot. Whereas Chainsaw Man attracted audiences by pushing outside of the genre with stylistically experimental manga, Spy Family is just like a really solid shonen series that doesn't do anything all that new, but instead just hits kind of 3 major shonen genres. We got sentimental family stuff, we got goofy kid stuff, and we got spy action intrigue, hitting lots of key shonen demographics right on the bullseye. That was a hard sentence to get through. Hitting lots of key shonen demographics right on the bullseye. So likewise, the Chainsaw Man adaptation reaches for this kind of like mainstream cool audience with the smart film type direction that I just explained in length. But the Spy Family adaptation just wants to get more anime fans. It wants to appeal to every anime fan that likes any of these genres, and especially to those that like all 3 of them. It just excels at everything people typically want from anime in all of these genres, like The family stuff has this warm, beautiful, healing animation when it's focused on Anya and her goofy kid adventures at school. It becomes like great gag animation and focuses on the iconic Anya faces and stuff. And then when there's the spy action plot lines, it's awesome action Sakuga that really leans into the qualities of anime action scenes and less so about this kind of like live action Hollywood style. It really does focus on the Sakuga, on the joy of movement and hand-drawn animations, of seeing characters fight and run and shoot and jump, and just the lovely fluidness of it all. So we talked a lot in a previous review talking about the first season, why I think this like trifecta of genres is so strong, why I think it made the show so wonderful. So I'm not going to get into all of that again. Let's just kind of focus on what did I think of season 2. So for better or for worse, it's at this point that we see a lot of the hallmarks of a long-running manga start to take shape in this series. So manga, I think, kind of has like two very distinct eras. The first is when the series isn't kind of guaranteed to just run indefinitely, when it's still kind of finding its footing, finding its audience, sort of feeling out and establishing how it's going to be, how the characters are going to be, all that stuff. And then afterwards, when there is this sort of guaranteed return, and they can just sort of run it for as long as they do, there's a lot of ways in which series kind of shift gears. So more of a focus on arcs, more substantial multi-chapter, multi-episode sagas. Although I was very impressed and surprised that the anime did adapt a lot of standalone mini adventures, even taking ones that are outside of the main series in the manga, like things that were released as tankobon bonus chapters. They still adapted, I think, just to kind of offset this arc-centricness in the pacing, which was a really good move. The cast expands, there's more of a focus on side characters. Side characters will be introduced and kind of given full substantial arcs, even though in the end they are just going to be relegated again to side character and not kind of take their place in the family. Development of deeper character modifications. Modifications. I'm gonna get something to drink. 1 second. That one made me think I'm talking too manically. Motivations. That at first the characters can be introduced just with their kind of overall goals of the series, but that now we've spent some time with them, we can't just kind of keep putting obstacles in the path of their main goal. Instead, kind of emerging from their character and personality, they have to have more deeper kind of complexes and stuff. So a major one is Yor has all these feelings of inadequacy and wondering why she was chosen as the wife and blah, blah, blah. The lore becomes more complex and takes a more significant role. A lot of the plot threads take place within the intricacies of lore. Instead of it just being this kind of like single layered motivator, there's a Cold War. There's a bunch of spies because of the Cold War. Instead, we're getting more into the minutia of, oh, this country has this rebellious faction that's organizing a coup, and the other country both wants to support and also quash this for differing reasons. There's factions within that country too. It just gets a lot more intricate, and our own characters are kind of like navigating through that more than it just being the kickoff to a more kind of simplistic adventure. The core elements of the series now established don't get as much particular attention. And by that I mean, in this case, the family coming together and learning to appreciate one another and kind of learning to get over themselves and enjoy this bizarre situation. That doesn't become as much of a focus since they've already done that. You can't have infinite stories about Anya feeling like she's actually cared for because it's already happened, right? So I think these types of developments are good for a long series. It helps them be less repetitive. It rewards people that are invested in it. It starts leading to kind of more intricate like speculation and more investment in return. The specific developments here are a little hit and miss for me. Like this whole Yor inadequacy thing, I didn't really like so much. It just sort of felt a little underwhelming, I guess, and kind of shortchanged the character in a way that bothered me. And then some of the lore stuff too, I found myself a little exhausted by. Like, I think they tipped the scales a little too heavily into needing to be invested in that stuff. But overall, way more hits than misses. There was more of these elements that I enjoyed than things I didn't enjoy. Like, a lot of the side characters were really interesting, and some of the lore stuff, like, when it had, like, a clear ramification and just sort of the escalations and stuff, I really enjoyed. But it highlights a disconnect in manga/anime expectations that's interesting. So after I finished watching this, I just read the manga until I was caught up. I just couldn't help myself. I really wanted to know what happens next. And since they hadn't announced the season 3 yet, I was like, oh geez, who knows how long I'm going to be waiting. But what I found was like a lot of moments in the anime that sort of bugged me for one reason or another. In manga, I wasn't bothered by at all, and actually I found very engrossing. So in the manga, if we have a few chapters that are just purely high-stakes spy action, it doesn't really feel as big a deal, because you can read a manga chapter in around 10 minutes or less, and you're probably reading it alongside a whole bunch of other manga, right? That's how they sell it, is in one big book that contains like 30 series, right? So you're balanced out that even if this series is full intense, your mood overall is balanced by reading a couple other comedies or reading a nice heartwarming slice of life or something. But in anime, it feels like these other emotional elements are more conspicuously absent, because for 22 minutes you're just locked into the spy thriller, and you're kind of like, hey, isn't this the like heartwarming family series? Isn't this the goofy kid comedy where she's always stumbling over herself at school? It just makes it feel less balanced. It doesn't have the same sense of wholeness as often as season 1, I think because they were focusing more on those core elements. But it's still really great, don't get me wrong. I mostly complained on that last slide, but it's still a fantastic show. Like, overall, yeah, season 2 not as enjoyable as season 1 for me, but still really, really good. The animation in all 3 of the modes before is KyoAni tier, which is the highest praise I can possibly give for that kind of animation. They kept it up with this season. It's warm and rich and beautiful, but with explosively creative Sakuga, and just the faces are hilarious and have never stopped being hilarious. The OP is so lovely, scored by Bump of Chicken. Reminds me of the Sangatsu no Lion OPs, which they also scored. Feelings of long awaiting progress slowly trickling along have so much significance now. Like, the overarching schemes of the series, the main goals of the characters, do advance bit by bit throughout the season in a way that feels more and more satisfying as you become invested. Still loaded with such intrigue. Again, this is an example, I think, of loose world building, where they just sort of loosely suggest all these potential future arcs. It doesn't really matter if they actually pay them off or not. It just gives this amazing sense of intrigue, of a huge world unfolding before you. Yeah, so as I read the manga, I need to know. The manga's been pretty fantastic. Again, it's like really substantial arcs, like arcs that stretch for more than one volume. So it'll be interesting to see how the anime adapts it, if they do adapt it, because it, as I said, it would be like really weird to have like 3 consecutive episodes just solely focused on like one mode. And now they have a dog. They have a dog, and his name is Bond, and he always says Borf, and I love him so much. And you know, there can only be so many moments in a story that have the significance of adding like a new main character like this. And you know, most of them were in season 1. But this one was great. They got a dog. His name is Bond, and he says Borf, and I love him so much. And yeah, I think the arc in which they get Bond, which is a very high-stakes thriller-type arc, highlights some of this kind of tonal imbalance. And, you know, I felt kind of exhausted by those episodes. But in the end, they got a dog, and his name is Bond, and he says Borf. And I just love him so much. Just look at him. He's just such a big boy. He's just such a lovely big dog. He's such a friend. So yeah, I'd give this a 9.5. The previous season I gave it 10. I thought it was just kind of perfect. This one, less so. Like as I said, just the tonal imbalance of it made it so that the complete whole satisfied package that I got from most of the episodes in season 1, I guess I got less frequently this time. Okay, moving on. Actually, I'm gonna take a quick break and check my phone and make sure there's no emergencies. There's not. Nobody slacked me and said the company is on fire. All right. Let's continue with Molcar. There's more Molcar. Hooray! The first season of Molcar is something that I've shared with so many people. I just find it so creative and joyous and wonderful and fun and funny and endearing and cute and everything. And there's more. I was never sure if I should hope for more. I knew it was popular. I knew they were selling merch like crazy. There's even merch in like EB Games. That's wild. And made it to EB Games even. So yeah, so happy that they made more. Definitely, as I said, my most shared and rewatched show since it first aired, the first season of it. This new season, it's kind of like Spy Family Season 2, which sounds absurd when talking about a stop-motion show about little cars that are guinea pigs, but there's more arc focus. There's more characterization focus, rather than just the premise of the show carrying this variety of episodes. It's more like a complete story now about specific characters. Instead of like really over-the-top movie parodies and other totally acausal, completely disconnected fun times in each episode, it's this long-term plot situated in the Molcars having to go to driving school to regain their licenses. And this is pretty cool. I think it's very bold and very exciting that they took such a silly premise and were like, let's do some world building. let's really think about how this world functions. And I think this is great because it only highlights how charmingly absurd this world really is. Like, I think maybe one of my favorite moments in the entire first series is this one where it's the one where the Molcar keeps eating garbage and then it has to go poop. God, I love this show. And it just runs out onto the road at like a 90-degree angle, and all these other Molcars kind of like swerve around it, but like nothing bad happens. And it really like drives home the fact that like all the rules of the road are just kind of like common decency, and they're just kind of like putzing around and stuff. And so to have like driving school where they're supposed to be like taught these rules, and then it like still doesn't make sense. I don't know. It's just very funny to me. Seeing progress episode by episode was also pretty exciting. You genuinely felt proud of the little cars. Of course, the actual driving school component varies in how much it is like a motivator. They do all sorts of other stuff too. But it's enough that it's like a thread throughout the whole series that you're like, yeah, they're trying to get back on the road. You feel proud of them. And, you know, as I said, they do all sorts of other stuff too. It gets pretty extreme with varied styles. And there's one where they're like in a virtual reality driving simulator, and it's like a totally different style of depiction and stuff. And lots of little animated sequences and stuff too. Like, in many ways, it's even more experimental than the first series, even though the plot is a little more constrained. So that was tons of fun too. At the same time, this feels maybe a little paradoxical to say, yeah, it's got like a coherent, straightforward plotline now. It's actually way more confusing than the first series. Because it's like, if you're trying to tell a more substantial plotline, but all of your characters are just little Molcars that can just go pui, and a bunch of little stop-motion people that just kind of and then it's like kind of hard to figure out like what's going on. Many times at the end of the episode, I was just kind of left in this happy bewilderment that clearly they're conveying some story, like that has sort of like twists and revelations, but so much of it you're just like, what did that mean? But in the end, I loved it. It was a happy confusion, to be sure. But I would still put it a notch below the original series. I'll give this a 9.5 as well. Again, sort of like Spy Family, it just didn't have kind of like an emotional wholeness. That with the first Molcar, almost every episode I was left very satisfied that whatever kind of parody story they were telling was very simple to follow and had a satisfying resolution. It was like funny, it was cute, it was endearing. It had this sort of like wonderment to it. Whereas here, I don't know, not so much. Like more just sort of appreciation, I guess. Like it didn't hit me as emotionally as strong. Anyway, it's still very good. Still a blessing. Still another wonderful aspect of this godly season. All right, let's talk about Do It Yourself. This is a show I picked up because it seemed like a nice, cute girls doing hobby show. One of my favorite genres of anime, if not my all-time favorite. You just get a collection of girls, generally in high school. They pick up some hobby together. Fishing, climbing, camping, building, archery, traditional dance, motorcycling, biking, cooking. How am I already running out of examples? There's the bajillion more. Starting a band, becoming fans of a baseball team, riding on trains all the time, becoming live broadcasters, playing tennis but in a wacky way. These are all real, by the way. What else do I got? Playing traditional instruments, playing mahjong, playing mahjong, playing mahjong, playing mahjong. Many such cases. Okay, you get the point. I've seen a lot of these. I've either read them or watched them. And this one seemed great, because it's that, but they're learning how to do it yourself and make little woodworking and other such projects. It lived up to everything I hoped for. Cozy, relaxed place with warm watercolor backgrounds and a charming soundtrack. I can remember in my what am I going to watch next season, I checked out the poster and I said, that's watercolor backgrounds. The pacing is going to be slow. And I was right, and I loved it for that. Production that has lots of little gags and aesthetic breaks, but not too many. Never like abrasively, never jarringly or shockingly, but just fun little ones where if the characters are discussing, okay, but how do you build that sort of thing? Suddenly we'll pop into a totally different art style, a kind of tutorial in the world of imagination where we see it assembled before our eyes. Cast of endearing and quirky characters that learn to love do-it-yourself projects together. Major plotline, as it is in many such series, about gathering these people together, building our DIY club. Each one encounters DIY a little differently, based on their own personalities, based on their own interests. They all have their own unique moment where they suddenly see the appeal and they decide to join the club. Lots of info on DIY itself. This is by far my favorite aspect of these girls doing hobby type shows, is you get to learn a lot about the hobby itself in a very friendly way, in a very practical way that encourages any watcher that, you know what, you're like already 90% of the way to being able to do this yourself. You just need a few tools, you just need a few boards, and you can make something cute like this. And also in a way that's like very colored by the characters presenting it to you. Like it's a way to develop the personalities of the characters by how they present things to you, how they teach you things, what they focus on. There's some hardships, they're surmounted in arcs that spurs on the characters' growth throughout the series, but then also lots of little episodic adventures that highlight a specific project or a specific setting in which they want to build something or gather materials. So basically all of this is like, if you took the most basic template for a cute girls doing cute things show, this would tick off every single box. But there's more to it too. There was a lot of things that I didn't expect, that I wouldn't expect a show like this to kind of push for, that I really, really enjoyed. First off, it had a lot of stuff that felt very, very classic in a lovely way that was very nostalgic for kind of the era when I was first getting into this genre, which was like the 2000s. The character animation has a really charming mix of very minimal, flat designs, but then really wacky, over-the-top character sakuga that I really like. The characters are like super expressive, super over-the-top. Their personalities are sometimes extreme in a really old-school way, where it feels like for a long time anime had this deserved reputation of the characters are so annoying. They're always repeating catchphrases and vocal tics and just speaking in this really over-the-top exaggerated way. Friggin' anime gives me a headache. That was like the stereotype for a long time. And then I think somewhere around 2010, maybe largely due to the influence of KyoAni, things really started backing down to more kind of like realistic characters, realistic performances. The idea of a verbal tic where a character ends the sentence every single time with like nya really fell by the wayside. But this is bringing it back for the fans. Lots of just weird little quirky things in the series. Like the main character, Selfu, has this pet pig that wears sunglasses. And every time her mom mentions that they're going to have pork for dinner, it just cuts to the pig like freaking out and sweating. That's such like an old anime thing to do, right? To have that kind of gag, to have that kind of like pseudo mascot character. It feels like the quirks that once really defined this genre, that have kind of sublimated into something that has maybe a bit more broad appeal, are re-emerging again very strongly in this show, which I really enjoy. Other quirky stuff highlighted this neat near futurism. So the very first shot of the series is like a drone flying overhead. Almost all the kind of ambient shots show drones. The computational tools in the series are well beyond anything we have in real life, like crazy AR projection, being able to visualize DIY projects, the stereotypical future transparent screen that they're always interfacing with. It reminds me of Iso a little bit, the guy who made Orbital Children and Denocoil, in that it's not like super futuristic, it's not inconceivable, and the focus is usually just on like quality of life, focusing on the convenience of the future in this way. Not that things are mind-blowingly different, but you're just kind of doing things in this really kind of smart and fun way. There's some conversations about things like AI and the singularity and the idea of exponential AI growth and all this stuff. I was really surprised that the series decided to tackle those concepts. And it does so really casually. It does so in a way that it doesn't really impact the series. But it's just sort of interesting flavor to kind of situate it in this really technologically minded space. And of course, this kind of makes it full circle in an odd way, because I'd say this sort of ambiguous time period, elements of futurism, characters casually having like rocket skateboards and stuff, is very classic anime. Probably best exemplified by Purin has this weird jellyfish robot buddy that she usually just kind of ignores and mistreats, but is always trying to like help her with tasks and stuff. That feels like very, very classic to me, because it's just never explained, and it's just this kind of like weird comedic relief. And then, of course, well, I don't know why I said of course. This, I think, is actually not of course, but instead just very brilliant direction of the show. One of the major themes discussed by the characters in the show is this tension between really futuristic technology that makes your life easy, and then the appeal of actually building something yourself out of raw materials. What is the joy you can get for that? Is it obsoleted? Is it old and dusty? Or is there still something really satisfying about doing it? Likewise, this was probably the most unexpected thing for me. The two main characters have a lot of tension between them. And it's kind of a classic anime type relationship of one girl who's very aloof, very dreamy, very silly, doesn't take things seriously, is always trying to vie for the attention and approval of a much more like kind of serious type A type girl, who is at both kind of distraught but endeared, kind of concerned but compelled by the antics of the other character. So, you know, this is a pretty classic dynamic. It shows up in a lot of shows, but I was really impressed by like kind of how long they kept the tension. That they didn't, you know, after like 2 episodes, make them all buddy-buddy. And again, it's the same tension of Purin is super technologically minded. She sees DIY as a waste of time. She thinks Serfu's just going to hurt herself. And then Serfu's always trying to show her the appeal. Isn't this cool? We built it ourselves. Honestly, this is pretty rare for me that I was like kind of distraught by how tense it was between them. And then there's shots in the OP where they're getting along and dancing together and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. She's going to come around eventually. The OP wouldn't lie. So even though the tension was drawn out a lot longer than I anticipated in a way that really impressed me, I did take a lot of like reassurance from the OP. So in the end, I think the show isn't like a mind-blowing masterpiece. I don't think it's something that people outside of this genre's fandom should necessarily seek out. It isn't going to be like a revolution. It isn't going to, produce a ton of merch and doujinshi or whatever for years and years to come. Instead, it's kind of like immediately cemented itself as this sort of timeless recommendation, where if somebody's getting into the genre of slice of life, and they want to go past like the most famous shows, they want to go into more, for fans of the genre type shows, this is a show that's going to make that list. Along with stuff like Hidamari Sketch, one of my all-time favorites, or Sketchbook Full Colors. I don't know why I thought of two art ones right away. Or Kofuku Graffiti, or, ones that are like for the fans, these kind of cult classics. And in the end, I think that's just as important for a genre like this, to have this kind of base of like a seemingly endless stream of shows you can watch if you're getting into it. To me, that's just as important as like the flag bearers, as the masterpieces that everyone should watch. So really great show. I had a great time. So much to say about it in praise. I'll give it a solid 9 out of 10. Really good stuff. Okay, but I said, yeah, it's a great show. It's something that will shore up the genre for fans of it, something that'll always be there for people that just want to explore slice of life. I said that in contrast to a show that's like a masterpiece, that breaks out of the genre, that is something that everyone who's into anime should watch. Anyone who's just into fiction should watch. And that's what we got here with Bocchi the Rock. Here is a hands-down slice-of-life masterpiece that I would recommend to absolutely anyone at all times ever. Such an achievement of production creativity and variety and expression. The parts of anime that make me love anime, that keep me coming back season after season after season. It's all for shows like this, If it wasn't for shows like this after maybe a year or so, I might give up on seasonal anime. I might finally step off the treadmill. But as long as there's even the slightest possibility of seeing something this good, seeing it from week one, being part of that huge social phenomenon of everyone kind of like catching on to how good it is and talking about it, anticipating it, getting hyped for it. That feeling is so addictive, it's so beautiful, that this show could last me a decade of mediocre other things. It's so good. It's so good. This might be the most creative production I've ever seen. I always kind of have Shaft as this like platinum standard for creativity in production. If you want to really get into what I mean by that, what I think the Shaft style is, look for my maybe fall 2021 anime review or summer 2021. Pretty sure it's 2021, where I talk about Pretty Boy Detective Club, which was basically the final great Shaft masterpiece. And I really, really break down exactly what I think this sort of creative direction is. And this goes even further. This is even more free and just choosing how to depict any given emotion, any given line of dialogue, any action, any development. They just had nothing off the table. It's amazing. Absolutely no holds barred in how things are depicted. Everything is on the table. Everything I've seen in any other show, and a bunch of new things too. They just did it all. But then also, some of the most powerful, compassionate, expressive, detailed, fluid character sakuga I've ever seen too. Like, really aiming for both the things I love in Shaft and the things I love in KyoAni, my two favorite studios. Taking the creative liberties of something like the Monogatari series, but then also like zooming so much in on the intricacies of characterization and animation, without like any jokes, full sincerity, just animating characters in a really compelling way, especially in the performance scenes, which they do such an amazing job of like spacing out throughout the series. A lot of shows, if they have, it's about a band, great. We just saved ourselves 4 minutes of animation every episode because they can just play a song near the end. But they really make each of the times you see them perform so impactful, so meaningful. It feels like it out KyoAni's KyoAni. Oh, nah, that can't be right. It's on par with KyoAni. They live up to the feeling in K-On! Or Hibike of just really powerful, moving performance scenes. Essentially, this is a series where the production understands both the appeal of K-On! And the appeal of reading Twitter shitposts at 2 a.m. Through this cursed alchemy, the anti-K-On! Starring anti-Yui has been synthesized. So because I hadn't mentioned it yet, I should have done this at the start, but this is a show about a band. It's about a group of girls that get together to play rock music. Just like K-On!, except that where K-On! Starred are very clumsy, very silly, but extroverted, lovable goofball Yui. The star of Bocchi the Rock, the titular Bocchi, is a crippled mess of social anxiety and total executive dysfunction. And from that, one of my favorite shows of all time emerges. Let's just praise it a bunch. Lots of other good stuff to call out here. One of the things that really amazed me was the little scene that they perform in. The other bands that they meet, the people that run the various concert halls, the concert halls themselves, feels so well realized. It feels so believable and so much fun that you can really just imagine how thrilling it must be for this little artistic community to kind of grow together. The extremely detailed background shots with all sorts of like fake band posters, fake band stickers, album release announcements and stuff. It's just so fun. It's just so fun. So many scenes I just would pause and just look at everything. Tiny little details that are like a square inch on your TV have so much love put into them. Somebody came up with a whole fake band and thought about what their fake band image would be like. This authentic care is shown everywhere. Every setting. Not just the concert halls, but the music stores. When they go to the beach, there's so many little details that bring it to life. The school festival especially. I love a good school festival episode, and all the stuff leading up to their performance where you're exploring the different classrooms and just the chaos and energy and stuff. It's such a feeling of authenticity and of caring, like really caring about getting across an experience that captures what's so great about those spaces. Even things that are just shown for like a moment. Like there's a couple jokes where Bocchi imagines her future, and of course it is terrifying and bleak and sad, but they show future Bocchi's room for maybe a total of like 30 frames. No, not 30 frames, sorry, like 30 seconds. But there's so much love put into that depiction. So many little details. It's so fully realized. The performances are awesome. The instruments are all animated extremely accurately, extremely dynamically. Again, just showing this care for authenticity. And they're so authentic too. Like, I think it's very easy to fall into a trap of making your performances within a show like this like unnaturally perfect, but instead you really get the sense that Bocchi is this antisocial guitar savant, that she's become extremely technically proficient but has no experience playing with other people. Like that really comes across just in like the sheer audio performance, of course highlighted as well by the character animation. Kita feels like an amateur. She makes mistakes. I love any show where they'll record multiple takes and play a different take each time they perform. And the takes will have mistakes in them. The takes will be imperfect. Hibike was really good about this too, such that you can actually feel their development. You can feel where their strengths and weaknesses are. And the other two, they feel like hardworking, talented high schoolers, but not unreasonably gifted, not, total unnatural geniuses, but instead, again, you can feel their strengths and weaknesses. The way their uncertainties and mistakes and improvements are captured. Yeah, like I said, the Hibike, I think, set the standard for this, but this lives up to it. You really feel their growth as a band. The VF performances are fantastic, too. The most memed on and discussed moment of the series is, of course, when Bocchi is asked to make an Instagram account and glitches out and unleashes this insane alien scream that, has been touted as the least human thing a human being has ever done. But everyone just really brings their character to life in a way that really highlights how extreme each of the characters' personalities are, but still feels just like very well expressed as human beings, like not as caricatures, not as something so exaggerated you can't relate to it. Characters themselves are like very fresh too. They're just archetypal enough that you have some expectations for how they're going to behave and stuff, but then those archetypes are expanded in a very compelling, very satisfying way that isn't just like raw subversion, but just kind of a sequence of like, yeah, that would make sense. Yeah, they would act like that. Oh yeah, in this situation they would feel like that. They all feel like they have complete personality aligned lives going on outside of the band. Like, I don't know. It's hard to explain how a show can create this feeling, but I think it's very strong here that they just seem like real people, that you see little glimpses of their lives. So many great homages to other shows, other bands. All of your intellectual curiosity to kind of seek out these references and understand why they chose certain different things is really rewarding. But it's still this complete, self-contained, perfectly placed, unique experience that doesn't really require you to be familiar with the genre or familiar with other shows or familiar with any of these tropes. Like, it really set out to excel as a series unto itself. So yeah, this show took off like crazy. People really be out here watching a slice of life show, and that's great. So yeah, that's essentially why I like it so much. But let's spend some time here breaking down why it's become one of the biggest hits of the year. Why I see way more people praise this than I've ever seen for any other show in this genre. For a lot of people, I think this is the first show. Well, I think this is the first show they've seen with such bold production. Before this, maybe Madoka. Madoka was quite experimental in some ways. Same with One Punch Man. Another very popular series that really pushed the limits of like Sakuga and had a lot of, art style gags and stuff. Gurren Lagann, the biggest Gainax / Trigger show that I think really solidified a lot of people's imagination of what anime should look like. All masterpieces in their own right, of course, but like, this show goes so far beyond that. And also, as I said, like, this show had an audience unlike any other slice of life show I've ever seen. I think for a lot of people, this is their first experience watching this kind of cute girls do hobby type show. Before this, yeah, were there any? Am I forgetting? Like, K-On! Was pretty popular, but it wasn't this popular. Were there any that came close to this? I don't think so. So, I'll be real, normally this would kind of annoy me. Because, I don't know, I'm like a pretentious person, I'm an elitist person, to some extent. I'm someone that takes pride in like keeping up with media and trying to seek out good media, especially with anime. And so sometimes it kind of bugs me when something that I've been into for a long time finally like kind of breaks out and becomes popular. Because I'm like, it was there the whole time. It's always been there. I've been telling you this whole time. You could have known. You could have been watching this kind of stuff before. You would have liked it. Do you want to come back and watch the other ones? Because you'll like them. It just kind of creates a complex in my mind of, I don't know, like on some levels I'm proud and satisfied and happy to see this sort of stuff get success because it means more of it will come, which of course excites me, but like, it's like, come on, man. I've told you, it's good. Now you know? But this time, I think this is what makes me not annoyed in this case, is that it really is that novel. I can't in good faith say, oh, you liked this. Oh, well, you should have been watching Slice of Life this whole time, or you should have been watching Shaft series this whole time. Because there really wasn't anything like this until now. It really is a new frontier in these genres and these styles. But yeah, I think aside from opening the door to these established good things, like showing people how much fun it is to watch a show with this sort of production, showing people how satisfying a good slice of life show can be, the series, I think, also resonated deeply with a lot of people by appealing to a relatively new phenomenon. I'm going to call this the good, fail, cute appeal, or GFC. Let's break it down. Okay, so what is GFC appeal? All right, so first, good. We have a character that's very good at some hobby or skill. Usually, it's somewhat impractical. It's not something you can very directly make money from. It's more just kind of like an artistic thing, some creative process. And usually it's something that you can just grind away at alone. That doesn't require you to go to a specific location, to have like a teacher, to be involved in like a community. It's something you can do in your closet. Next we have fail. The character has dismal social skills. They have degenerate lifestyle habits. They don't take good care of themselves. They might be a little insane. They might not totally be connected with reality. And last, cute. They're cute. With these three elements combined, we have the GFC appeal. This is not the most mind-blowing thing, I'm sure. Reading this, you're like, yeah, I can think of some examples of that. But that's kind of what I want to drive home. I think this is a phenomenon that's like really kind of catching fire lately. I think VTubers are an excellent example of this. Usually they have some sort of special talent. They're really good at singing, they're really good at drawing, they're good at gaming, or just the sheer fact that they're capable of streaming for hours and hours and hours. It's something that their audience specifically goes like, wow, they're so good. But note, all of these things you can just kind of grind away at by yourself. They're not things that necessarily have a ton of social capital and certainly don't always translate into real capital. Many stories, and here maybe I have a biased perspective I don't watch VTubers myself, but I see a lot of clips of VTubers recommended by friends or popping up in the areas of Twitter I frequent. So I'm exposed to a decent amount of VTuber content. And from the slices that I've seen, there's a lot of stories about their personal lives. Who knows if they're even true or not, that suggest like a very degenerate lifestyle. Staying inside all day, or talking about traumatic experiences in their childhood, usually played for laughs, but like stories of them failing socially, questionable hygiene. The avatar feels like it's kind of masking some unfathomable degeneracy. You never see their room. You never see what they themselves look like or how they dress like or if they've been showering or any other indicator of their actual real physical health. And it's kind of up to you to imagine how bad things really are. But in the end, the mask isn't like wrong either. You don't doubt that they really are cute because the digital avatar is cute. You get a sense that in the end they are an adorable person, even though every indicator you've had of the person suggests someone with maybe questionable lifestyle habits. Another phenomenon that I've seen very, very popular is lots and lots of artists who are very popular on like Twitter and Pixiv and stuff, who are immensely talented, will share slices of their life that suggest, again, a total failure to kind of integrate into society. Always tweeting about, just day-to-day failures. I forgot to do this. I spilled this. I ate this. I didn't eat this. Kind of speaking to just sort of like mental health issues, the ADHD perhaps. sometimes making like really self-deprecating little comics. I'm thinking here like Ayu, you may have seen before. She's very, very popular these days. Most of her comics are about just like social failure. Artists that make all sorts of stuff, typically when drawing themselves, it's very like self-deprecating. It really kind of overly humble presents them as these like very malfunctioning people. And then they turn around and tweet something beautiful, something highly skilled, something adorable that kind of replaces what they really are in your mental image with the adorable drawing. Something really amazing. A variant that's a little different is, this is another phenomenon that I've found really popular lately, is like behind the scenes type A vlogging, where you have a beautiful type A career winner person who vlogs about her daily life, but emphasizes that she's like got a terrible caffeine addiction, chugging coffee all the time, staying up all night, and emphasizing things that they really can't do, that even though they're so successful in like their career or their studies or whatever, they're totally dysfunctional when it comes to like socializing or being media literate or who knows what else. But just like that kind of contrast, and it's sort of like a gap moe. Many, many such cases. Again, I'm sure you can think of some in other anime or in other series or just these pseudo real life examples. It feels like it's growing in popularity. So why I think this is so popular is that it triggers the GFC aspirational / savior complex, where on one hand, you have people with the idea that I could be them. I could be in that role. Like the hard part, the part that seems maybe insurmountably hard for some people, which is, you know, social skills, taking care of yourself and stuff, that isn't necessary. You know, all of these examples I'm looking at, those people can't take care of themselves either. They have a lifestyle. They think, you know what, I have that lifestyle too. If I was so motivated, I could grind in my closet and get really good at guitar too. All it requires is like time and dedication, and I have the lifestyle that can support that. And I think there's like maybe a little mix up in causality where because these attributes become so closely associated, they start to think, oh, the cute aspect, the fact that people find these characters really endearing and attractive or whatever, is probably because of these shortcomings in combination with the skill. And I think in some cases that is actually quite close to true. But it's like debatable because in the end you are not a cute anime girl. So in the end, they think, yeah, like I'm pretty close to this position. Conceivably, I could be in this role and someone will care for me. It's evident that people are really caring for these types of characters. Someone will care for me too. But on the other hand, another complex emerges where you think, I could help them. That if I knew such a person, if I befriended such a person, I would be such a beautiful, instrumental savior to them. Because my social skills, they're not, maybe they're bad. Maybe I also have some shortcomings. Maybe I also don't know how to take care of myself in some regard. But they're good enough. They're better than this extreme example that I see in this character. They're good enough that I can cover them. I can help them. I can teach them and help them navigate through situations they otherwise couldn't. So yeah, I could help them build up these lifestyle habits. Like, oh, this character can't even bathe themselves, but I can. I can help them learn to do that. So we'd improve together. And in return, they would care for me. I'd have someone who cares for me in return. In the end, all of these fantasies, pretty much every fantasy that emerges from anime, or at least certain genres of anime, comes down to, I want someone who will care for me. I want someone who will love me. And I think this is yet another kind of psychological pathway to that craving, to that absence. Let's analyze. So this reflexive dual appeal, because I'm not saying that people sort themselves into one of those two categories. I'm saying that for a lot of viewers, both of those happen simultaneously, which seems a little psychologically broken. kind of pulling you in two directions that are perhaps both equally impossible. Wanting to both be and save someone, or perhaps rapidly alternating your understanding of who is helping and who is being helped, kind of feels a little insane. Or, maybe the more realistic alternative is that even if you get into one of those roles, you're going to end up forming this really nasty codependent pairing of almost like patron and savant, which is very dysfunctional in real life. But honestly, and this is a low bar, I think it's actually better than a lot of the previous anime paradigms of desire. Okay, well, like let's look at where the bar is. Let's look at how a lot of other series in the past have kind of suggested an aspirational relationship. A beautiful, talented girl takes an interest in me for no reason. I'm just like a background type mob, but wow, the idol of the whole school is sitting next to me, and for basically no reason, maybe I do one generically nice thing, she falls head over heels for me. This is hopeless. This will not happen. And it's deeply, deeply othering to just kind of put this other person on a pedestal and then be like, oh my gosh, she's looking down at me from her pedestal. Or how about a very cute but totally helpless girl needs my protection? This is also very othering. It's infantilizing. It's nobody is really that helpless, and there's so many manga that are just about, I'm the only one that stood up for this totally hopeless girl who has no functional skills whatsoever, but I'm gonna carry her forward through life and take care of her. Like, that's not fair to anybody. That's not a good relationship, and it's no good. Only I understand the hidden charm of the gross girl. This one was quite popular for a while. She's not meant to be cute. She's not meant to be popular. But, I see her hidden charm. Again, this is very othering and insulting. It's very limiting. It speaks to just like a predefined power structure in the relationship that isn't good for anybody. So, in pretty much all of these situations, it's like one of the two characters is left utterly hopeless and helpless and just sort of dependent on the other one. This one I would suggest is a bit better, and I'd say the GFC dynamic just in general has a few comparative advantages. It emphasizes that things like real life skills, socialization, hygiene, routine, those are worth developing. They're presented as major obstacles to the GFC character that makes it so that her wonderful talent and charming cuteness don't really reach their potential because she's so socially limited, right? That's important because that's something that can happen in real life. that is what would happen in real life if you were a genius savant at some skill but had no way of connecting with other human beings. So it's actually teaching you something important there. It fosters a relationship of teaching someone to grow where they have shortcomings, and I think as problematic as like a codependent relationship is, and certainly it's something that can get worse and worse and worse, there is positive versions of it. There is positive aspects to it, especially maybe like at the start, where you can help someone develop these sorts of skills. You can help someone kind of like get their life on track. And conversely, it's like a two-way street where the other person does have like admiration and respect of, wow, you're so good at your hobby or your skill. Like, I really want to help foster that. I really want to help you share that with the world, because I think that's so wonderful. It's not just you're cute because you're helpless. It's not just I feel bad for you. There's an actual mutual respect. You're attempting to become the best of both for each of you. You're sharing where the other lacks. It's quite beautiful in a way, as long as, it doesn't spiral into a codependent nightmare. Of course, Bocchi the Rock is this excited type of story. She teaches Kita to play the guitar. Kita learns to love and appreciate this world of music that Bocchi brings her into. Meanwhile, Kita brings Bocchi into the real world of outside. She learns to talk to people. She learns to get over her overwhelming social fears. She puts herself out there and has a huge range of experiences. So, the GFC pathology, it's not perfect. You certainly don't want this to just kind of play out in real life. But I think it's the healthiest such archetype yet. Again, a low bar, but one that it leaps over quite tremendously. Let's continue taking the long, long, long way around to mental health via anime. So what I think is so powerful isn't, though, that people are watching this show and necessarily having that reaction to Bocchi. I think much more this sort of relationship, if you can call it that, this GFC appeal, happens with things like VTubers or happens with parasocial relationships with somebody on Twitter. I don't think people are actually engaging with Bocchi so much this way. But I think it's because it's a confluence of like this and other hyper modern factors. Super experimental production that none of us have ever seen. A well realized, authentic, rich, and dynamic music scene to explore. It's like cool. Like this show I think is legitimately cool. The music they play is cool. The spaces they occupy, if they were real, they'd be like intimidatingly cool. It feels like a scene that's like at the edge of things we're excited to explore. And then the GFC character archetype, which is very, very spotlighted, that whole dynamic, that whole relationship. Bocchi, of course, does not want to be in the spotlight, but for better or worse, there she is. And I think this is sort of like a sociological phenomenon that people are encountering in more places. Even if not directly, they understand that this type of character is getting popular. And again, it just sort of makes it feel modern. All of these things push you into thinking, this is something new. This is something important. This is something that represents the next wave. Which, of course, all of this is conveyed in an extremely sincere, character foundational, emotionally driven story of compassion, passion, growth, triumph. It really adds up to something that feels on the forward edge of the medium in terms of what anime is accomplishing in the world. I always talk about anime meeting you where you are. And this is another such auspicious meeting in a beautiful life. Sounds like hyperbole. Sounds like I've lost it. But I really, really, really like this series. I liked it that much. This is easily a 10 out of 10. This is so much a 10 out of 10 that it made me really hesitant to give out any other 10s this season, because I wanted to signify in an amazing, godlike season full of great shows, this stood head and shoulders above. Okay. Wow, that sounds like the end of the video, huh? just kidding. We still got so many more shows to talk about. Alright, so for a while I was saying, Bocchi the Rock? Yeah, I love that show. That's like my favorite slice of life since Yuru Camp. Which, I don't know, now that I've finished it, I might even like it more than Yuru Camp, but that's not even worth getting into. I love Yuru Camp too, that's my point. And I watched the Yuru Camp movie, and even though it's a movie and not a series, I'm including it here because it really felt like a series. It felt, honestly, like they could have just split it up into like 6 episodes and released it like that. Yeah, hooray. At long last, it's been quite a while since Season 2. We return to the healing, peaceful camping action. One of my favorite slice of life franchises of all time comes back at it with a movie. So if you want a zero spoiler recommendation, if you've been watching the series and you don't want to find out what happens in the movie, then just go watch it. That's my recommendation. Go. If you like Yuru Camp, then you probably already watched it, and I don't have to say anything. It was great, huh? If you like slice of life stuff, then you need to get on this franchise pronto. And of course, by pronto, I mean like at a very relaxed, self-directed pace, whenever you need a feeling of warm and healing and bliss. If you like down-to-earth stories of camaraderie and accomplishment, give this a try. It's very grounded, very reasonable characterization. They just set out to accomplish a goal, and you get to watch them every step of the way. It's just nice. You don't need to be into anime so much. You don't even need to watch the rest of Yuru Camp. You can just jump into this if that sounds good. Production is nothing mind-blowing. It's just very, very pretty and very tonally sound. That all of the production choices, I think, very nicely land to kind of deliver the emotional response they want. Honestly, I think the Yuru Camp TV series was more experimental, was a little higher effort even in terms of like Sakuga and stuff, which is a little surprising. That's usually the opposite for movies, but again, just like a very nice, straightforward production. The direction and pacing and structuring in this movie is just sublime. I've always said that the thing that really gets me about Yuru Camp is just how well composed the episodes are. That normally slice of life series, that's kind of like an afterthought. They just have like a list of scenes to include. But here they really do a great job of like pacing stuff across the whole episode, building up like themes and motifs and callbacks, just having like a really nice arc to each and every episode. And the movie, I think, does an even better job of just crafting a very nice story across the 2 hours or so. Yeah. The TV show already set new high bars for slice of life storytelling, episode by episode. Wonderful theming and escalation and cathartic climaxes. The movie further evolves with great sequence-based direction, interconnected across the entire film's 2-hour runtime. Sometimes I get to a point and I start explaining and elaborating on it, because I've forgotten that when I first wrote that point, I also thought about all this stuff, and then I just wrote it down. And that's why these videos are so god dang long. Okay, so what makes a good slice of life movie? Because, we'll get into spoilers a little bit conceptually about what happens in the movie. It's a little surprising, so if you want to go in totally blind, you can skip ahead to the next section, but it's something that I really want to talk about because it's very interesting to me. So, slice of life movies are a pretty tricky thing to conceptualize. Like, they're almost like paradoxical. How do you turn a story that's all about the everyday into something that's like dramatic, cinematic, worthy of sitting down and concentratedly watching for multiple hours? Sometimes it's all about a special occasion. K-On! Movie was like this, Nananguri movie was like this, where they go on like a big trip, and it's a new setting, new characters, new opportunities for crises and resolution. That's a pretty easy way to kind of structure your slice of life movie. Sometimes it looks like kind of a climax of building plot lines, where there are kind of overarching plot lines for the whole slice of life series, and then you put the big climactic resolution for those in the movie. Two Kyoani examples, Hibike Euphonium and Tamako Market, both had kind of subplots that drove the main series forward, hit a huge climax in the movie. But these, sometimes it's hard to even classify these as slice of life movies, because they kind of push in a direction that the series hadn't been going in so concretely, and usually it kind of feels like another genre set in that universe almost. So it's like, how do you get that? Something that feels special, but still operates along the same lines. So with the Yuru Camp movie, they went way bolder. They knew, apparently, that they wanted to make the movie after like a big time skip with the characters in their mid-20s and have them do something that only adults can do. And at first, they kind of went for the more traditional slice of life movie, where they're like, all right, let's have them go on a big trip. They're going to go camping overseas. But no. That still wasn't bold enough. They wanted something more uniquely adult. Not just like they could have done this as kids, but they weren't rich enough. So they chose... The main plot of Yuru Camp is our lovable cast as adults teaming up to open their own campgrounds. It walks through all the logistics, the challenges, the victories. And here it really, really reminded me of the PA Works Working People series. This is kind of like a loosely affiliated series of anime they've made over the last like decade and a half now. Aquatope, Shirobako, Iroha, Sakura Quest, where they just look at one particular company. In Shirobako, of course, it's an anime company. Aquatope, it's the aquarium, so on and so forth. And they just, at a very fine, detailed level, work through how does this operate? What are the lives of all the staff? What challenges do they have? What are their day-to-day operations? What are their big, exciting victories and stuff? And generally speaking, I love these shows. I haven't actually watched all of them, but Shirobako is among one of my favorite anime of all time. But I don't know, there's something very satisfying about them, and I think they capture a lot of the appeal in this Yuru Camp movie. It's a lot gentler than those series. Those series are often quite stressful. The odds are usually very stacked against our protagonists. They're fighting fire after fire, crises after crises. Things aren't so complicated either. Usually those series have like 5 different plots running simultaneously. And usually there's some like antagonist elements too, people that are opposed to the goals of the main characters. This movie has none of that. It's a lot gentler. But it still captures that satisfaction of seeing it all come together in a really, really moving way. You really feel for their achievement here. At first, it feels just like a simplified version of all these PA Works series, right? But it honestly feels more realistic because I think they emphasize more the work-life balance. Because it isn't so complex and entrenched and has all the characters just like constantly at their wits' end trying to solve problems. Instead, it's just like real-ass people, and this campsite project is important to them. They're going to work hard on it. But at the end of the day, it's just part of their lives. Like, there is a part where they have a pretty major setback. But I think it really highlights how expansive their lives are. There's no long sequence of crushing depression and moping around. They're just disappointed. And they're like, well, we got other stuff going on anyways. Like, I really appreciated that. Like, how low-key it was about this stuff in a way that felt very authentic and really made you appreciate the characterization. So it kind of feels more complete, I guess, than a lot of these other working focus series where work is like the be all end all. And I think in general it just speaks to this balanced characterization that really, really impressed me in the Yuru Camp franchise as a whole, and especially in this movie. True to the TV series, the characters aren't unnaturally joined at the hip. They've become adults. They've all graduated. They stay in contact, but they've been naturally pulled in very different directions. They don't get to see each other all that often. They all have jobs, expanded interests, adult lifestyles, and all of this, I think, slots in perfectly with our expectations of how they would be, given we knew them as kids. Like, it's really, really nice. They just feel so naturally like the people they would become as adults. As moderation grows, this sort of internal nostalgia for the TV series, where I started finding myself pining for the same things that the characters were feeling nostalgic for. Like, they were nostalgic for their childhood camping trips, and I remembered those episodes, and I felt nostalgic for them too. The characters reflect on things they can only do as adults, but also cherish their memories of what they could only do as kids. They talk about how simple it was as kids, that they would just go camping every weekend, and they didn't have all these bills and chores and jobs and everything to account for. The simple era of just camping is made even sweeter in the contrast to the complexities of modern life. I don't know, it's really lovely. Like, I think it really highlights and strengthens the sentimentality that is so core to all of Yuru Camp. Just this deep, sensual appreciation of these opportunities to enjoy nature and enjoy good food and enjoy company. It really speaks to this whole idea of like a slice of life that grows with you. And I feel like this is something that's very under-realized in most slice of life series that usually just take place over a pretty narrow time span. They're pretty tonally tight. There's no sense of like really dramatic growth or expansiveness. And I think some of my favorite slice of life series are the ones that kind of like pushed in this direction a little bit. Like Hitamari Sketch, one of my all-time slice of life series, has the characters age, and some of the characters graduate and leave, and then other new characters join the school. And just that sense of like time actually progressing and the characters growing is really, really moving. And I think this also suggests like just how powerful this can be. Although, I would be totally happy if they announced Yuru Camp Season 3 and it was just more manga adaptations of low stakes, slice of life camping. Yeah, overall, I really, really like this. I would give this a 9. I think in the end, it just wasn't quite as healing and warm and kind of blissful as the original series. Although the kind of added complexities and challenges and stuff are really compelling, I just praised them at length, you know that. I don't know, it just like, it didn't scratch the same itch, I guess. But still really, really nice. Ugh, okay, I'm going to... We're almost there. 2 more shows. Make sure nothing's on fire. No Slack notifications. Excellent. Nope. Okay, alright. 2 more shows. The final season of Mob Psycho is here. The 3rd season adapting in full the remaining chapters of the manga. It's been 6 years since the first season of Mob Psycho and over 10 years since the manga started, which kind of blew my mind because this was a series that I always really, really liked, but it never like commanded obsession for me. I never had like a Mob Psycho phase. I never had Reagan as my profile picture. It never really took over my life the way that some other series, have in the past. And yet, as it ends, I realized what a comforting companion it had been for the last decade. And I remember feeling the same way when the manga ended, but I think in the back of my mind, I was kind of comforted by like, oh, but we're going to get more of the anime, so it's not really over yet. But now it is. Now, barring, I don't know what, one deciding to do a continuation or animating the Reagan spinoff or something, it's really over. And I realize now that it really was a comforting companion. But man, what a beautiful way to end a series. After the huge climactic psychic war that was kind of built up from the very start of the series, that ends part 2, the series really turns inwards. Each of the 3 final major arcs, which are spread across these 12 episodes, fairly evenly actually, I think it's like 4, 4, and 4, looks at each of Mob's fundamental relationships. Aspects that have been played mostly kind of just like functionally, like as a plot element to drive motivation or whatever, or kind of as like a running joke, like the telepathy club, are suddenly in the spotlight. And all the underlying emotions of how characters really would behave in these relationships are laid bare and brought to light. These arcs also reflect the major themes and open questions of the series, like, what does it mean to be loved? Or what is the springtime of youth that Mob keeps trying to capture? And what does it mean to really, truly accept yourself? These are questions that we see kind of lessons regarding in all sorts of other arcs, of course. They're the really driving character motivations of Mob throughout the whole series. But here we get answers. We get an actual definitive feeling that the series has told you this is really what it means to be loved. This is what it really means to have a springtime of youth. This is what it really feels like when you truly accept yourself. And that's pretty bold, right? So let's talk a little bit about, one, the original mangaka, what his vision was for the end of this series. Because I think it's kind of hard to remember this, but kind of like One Punch Man, which of course is about Saitama, a superhero that's strong enough to defeat any enemy in just one punch. And of course, it just kind of starts off as a gag about that. This is also kind of a bit at the start. Like, it's also just sort of a funny premise that you expect to just motivate a whole bunch of gags. It's this naive but extremely powerful young psychic who's unwittingly serving as the assistant to a total fraud, someone who claims they have psychic powers and goes around doing exorcisms and stuff, but instead totally relies on Mob and has absolutely no clue what's going on. But like One Punch Man, from this very simple, silly premise, we dive into a world that's much more intricate and rich and psychologically expansive. Instead of building out, like in One Punch Man, this really awesome shonen power structure where we get a whole organization of the heroes and understanding all the monsters they're fighting and all these different power hierarchies and structures within their world, that ends up being, very advanced and involved and compelling in its own right. Here we build out an emotional world where the characters' powers and motivations and the impact they have on the world is built out from their latent feelings, from their desires and what they're missing in life. Feeling this world open up alongside Mob's own emotional development is really, really beautiful, I think. It's just such good writing that we have a character who's a little shy, a little introverted, doesn't really have the best social awareness. And as he starts to kind of understand others and understand their motivations and what drives them and their insecurities, the world opens up and we meet more and more characters, and he starts to notice more and more things that are then brought up as story elements. And we navigate through these very complicated social relationships with Mob as our growing avatar. It's just so beautiful. That's just good writing. And after all of this, we get a resolution, and I don't think this is spoilers, but it's very simple. It's very cathartically simple what ends up happening in most of these arcs. Because, I guess this is a spoiler, but I don't think it's surprising to hear that there aren't really any huge twists or subversions in these final arcs. There's surprises, and I won't spoil the surprises. There's some big surprises, but nothing that made you feel like anything was misleading. Nothing that made you go, shoot, I totally misunderstood that character. Geez, I totally didn't see it coming that such and such would come back. Instead, it's just very satisfying surprises of of course. Instead, you get payoffs to stories that make sense with every previous story step, with every beat of character establishment or relationship establishment. And when you've spent so long caring for these people, when the story has done such a good job of motivating them in each step and making them endearing and likable, making you root for them, this straightforwardness is so earned. Anything else wouldn't suffice. Any last minute twist, any total inversion, it would be so reductive. It would be dissatisfying in the long run, even if you were shocked in the short term. A situation where the demands of such a shocking climax that I feel like we've become way too over-reliant and over-expecting of anime for, all of that kind of falls behind just doing right by the characters. But don't worry, even though these arcs are maybe straightforward, they're very, very thrilling anyways. And that's not just because of the writing, although the writing itself has all sorts of thrilling turns and surprises. So much of it is brought out by Studio Bones' vision. Once again, they step up to an absolute S+ game in bringing this manga to life. Everything I praised the previous seasons for in terms of production is an overdrive here. They really wanted to blow your mind with the finale in terms of production. The contrast, and this is, the kind of key dynamic of the series, I think, is that it's all drawn by one originally, the manga, who's sort of an outsider artist. He's not formally trained. He's not super technically skilled. He draws these very simple-looking characters with very goofy expressions. And then seeing those brought to life with such rich sakuga, such intricate and expressive character animation, such amazing choreography in the fight scenes. It's an amazing contrast that I think is totally unique to this series and is so well done. Tons and tons of crazy arc breaks, but not to the extent that they lose kind of their charm each time it cuts to a radically different style for a gag or a surprise or whatever. They're all so charming, they're all so unique. And huge moments of just really sincerely beautiful shots. Not just action shots, not just fight scenes necessarily, but things that are just meant to leave you in awe. And they just simply do. They inspire sheer sublime beauty of wow, that was so well done. Each arc, I think, is really nice in how they build up its own aesthetic feel. This influences every level of production, not just what things look like, but kind of the pacing of the arcs, the timing of the comedy and dramatic scenes, just the general mood varies so much from arc to arc. The finale of the second arc especially. I won't spoil it for you. It's one of my favorite moments in the whole series. And the whole time I was watching this, I was just like looking forward to it. It lived up to that hype. I was overjoyed. I was giddy with how well done this was. Or no. Maybe the highlight for me is the climactic battle of the first arc, which in the manga, you know, given one's, let's say, restrained ability to draw, wasn't something that really stood out to me. But in the anime, like, oh my god, this is one of my favorite fight scenes in anime just ever. It's so over the top. It just goes on and on, just escalating. Just absolutely, like, mind-blowing Sakuga. You're just dizzied by the way the characters are moving. Or maybe just in the final episode, the simple, tender joys that, you know, honestly brought me to tears. Feeling the long resolution of this series that I've enjoyed for so long. Maybe that was the best part. The best part is that I don't have to choose. I got to enjoy this all. And I think what I really appreciated is, as I said with the manga, it's sort of like one took what he earned. He had spent so long carefully building up these characters in these situations that he didn't have to do something shocking. He didn't have to do something subversive, but instead could just kind of give you a nice, cathartic, wonderful ending for these characters you've grown to love. And I think Bones had the same approach animating it, that they start busting out all the traditional anime finale tropes, playing the theme song from season 1 at a climactic time, like tons and tons of little quickly spliced memory montages, and all of these super sentimental, nostalgic things that really rely on the idea that you have been a fan of the series for 6 years or 10 years, that you're really going to appreciate them. And yeah, they're cliche. Yeah, it's like easy to do that. But oh my god, they hit. Even if this series is so experimental, so subversive at times, you know, the production is very experimental, and the whole concept, as I said, is kind of originally just a setup for a joke. This finale solidifies it as an all-time classic. You should watch it. Of course, watch the first season first, and then the second season, and then this. But watch it. Watch it. It's so good. I'll give this a 10 as well. Oh, it's so good. I can't believe it's over. Gotta start reading One's new series. I can't remember what it's called. It kind of looks more like One Punch Man again, but whatever. I'm sure it's good. One is such a great storyteller. Okay, now on to our final show, the Tatami Time Machine Blues. So we return to the Morimi and Yuasa universe for the third time now. First there was the Tatami Galaxy, which came out in like 2010. And then in like 2016 or 17, there was Walk On Girl, The Night Is Young. I always say that wrong. It's The Night Is Short, Walk On Girl. I always say it in the wrong order, but whatever. But it's kind of neat because, of course, they're always kind of subverting who the characters are and what their relationships are, and they mess with the timeline extensively before this even. But kind of seeing the characters sort of back in their original roles, or at least something very close to Tatami Galaxy, after whatever the heck the movie was that them playing characters? Some of them don't quite line up, but whatever. It's like very fresh, but also deeply nostalgic. It's been 10 years now since the Tatami Galaxy. All of the unique charm of the original's production is here. I was really surprised to find out that... Okay, first off, I thought Science Saru had made Tatami Galaxy, right? So I was like, okay, this makes sense. Science Saru is Yuasa's company, but Science Saru hadn't actually been established when Tatami Galaxy came out, I think. So it was Yuasa working with a Madhouse team. And then, so I thought, oh, now there's a Science Saru, like, it's like really amazing how well they kept the style consistent. But I guess it's like mostly the same staff. I'm sorry, this isn't very interesting. I don't know, it's like, I'm just trying to replicate my own like kind of confusion as I was doing like research on these slides and stuff, where I was like unclear who had worked on these, but the important part is that they got the dream team. They were able to make something that had all the stylistic charm of the original. So what is this charm? I think it has the same inventiveness as something like Studio Shaft, which we talked about a bit earlier, where they're super eager to, at every opportunity, jump into a different art style, a different mode of expression, super exaggerated artistic styles or character depictions in a way to signify some mood or emotion or to highlight an idea or whatever. But here, it never feels like frantic or disorienting, whereas Shaft is all about that franticness and disorientation in a lot of series. And even when the characters are like panicking, you know, like because they think they're about to tear the fabric of reality apart through time machine shenanigans, there's this feeling of like smoothness and peacefulness, sort of like literary detachment, where you're kind of observing everything from this kind of like cosmic humorous perspective, you know? Of course, you're meant to empathize and relate with the characters and cheer for them and stuff, but you never feel too caught up in their troubles, only in their happiness. Yeah, everything is depicted with a certain sort of literary touch, which I suppose makes sense as it was adapted from a book originally. But it kind of feels like you're constantly flowing between a state of the main characters, kind of continuous stream of thought, very quick but not frantic narration, and then it sort of blooms and folds into a visual depiction that you can tell is still kind of being focalized through the main character. It feels both very, very precise, and that it's always kind of highlighting exactly what it wants you to understand this world and these characters, but also very poetic, very imaginative, that you feel inspired to kind of see things not just as the objects and people they are, but as sort of literary icons, if that makes sense. And without spoiling too much, you know, obviously it's a time travel based series, but the time travel element has the same kind of vibe, where it feels a little detached and literary. It's very, very tight. There's all sorts of very clever like connections and callbacks and foreshadowing payoffs, and you're constantly getting that nice little aha feeling of, oh, that must have been so and so in the past. It's tight enough that you can kind of anticipate and pick up on things that are being foreshadowed and make some accurate guesses. But you don't really feel too motivated to do that. Like, you don't really feel like it's necessary to get ahead and to anticipate some twists, because there's a certain security in this tightness. And it's because you can kind of see a little bit ahead, and there's a bit of like dramatic irony where you know that the characters aren't really going to screw up. You know that they're not in as much danger as they think they are. And so it kind of has that like farcical element where the more the characters panic, the more comforted you are in knowing, you know, that things will be all right in the end. So why do these series appeal to me so much? There's like a couple obvious answers. I just really like the production style. I really like the type of comedy. I like the way they're written. But I think it's worth kind of reflecting on the subject matter, because there's no other series or franchise that I think focuses so much on the appeal of campus life and of the appeal of being in university and that particular setting with all of its clubs and associations and that weird mix of like autonomy and responsibility. So when Atomic Galaxy first came out, I was in the midst of my own rose-colored university life. Just kidding. It was very, very chaotic. There was nothing I would say was too idyllic about my undergrad. But it did have little crystallized moments of poetry that I can still reflect fondly on. Any desired romances I had during that time were, unfortunately, total non-starters. We don't have to get into that too much, but it was Whiff City for me. 10 years later, I'm doing a lot better. As I've mentioned many times, I have a boyfriend. I'm actually in like a poly relationship. I have a girlfriend too. I don't mention her as much because I talk to my boyfriend way more about anime. But things are great. The three of us get along really great. It is very idyllic so far, at least. It's been beautiful. I have a great social life. I love my job. I don't feel really that stressed these days. I don't know. I don't need to get all personal about this, but yeah, things have been really good for me lately. I definitely prefer my life now than my campus days. But there is still something very wistfully alluring to the campus life. To the extent that I still fantasize about quitting my job and going into academia. Not just because academia is very interesting and I think I would find whatever I studied to be very interesting and fulfilling, but just to be on campus, just to be in those buildings again, be in that space again, feel that energy again. And I think something that this series captures really well, and something that I certainly experienced a lot in university, especially in these kind of crystallized moments, is an expectation of future nostalgia, and even an expectation of future regret, from a time that will be comparatively more stable, but maybe lacking some other things. There's a certain preciousness in this phase of your life that you can't cling to, and that maybe later you'll wish you had, but the character Higuchi, of course, shows you that clinging is pretty futile. You're adult enough now to have agency, but you realize that this will be the least adult things will be from now on, that your agency, I'm sure you'll get a lot more money later. You'll have a lot more opportunities in some senses, but the responsibilities will ramp up even quicker. And that this is the least adult you'll ever get to be again. The feeling of being dealt a brand new hand in Mahjong, I think, is the feeling of starting university. Where, statistically it's not going to play out all that exciting, but it feels like for a moment you can believe in something really, truly fantastic happening in your life. That's certainly how I felt when I started university. It felt like it was the first step on some really, truly grand adventure. And I would think, on paper, I wouldn't say my life is that adventurous. Like if I showed my 18-year-old self how my life would go from that point, I think they'd go, okay, good for you. But in the end, I'm like very, very satisfied and happy with my life. And yet there is still the feeling of like, I got like a Baimon. This is Mahjong terms. I got a good hand. But there still was that time in which I thought I could get Yakuman. I could get the best hand, Just kidding though. The real reason I like this series so much is Ozu. What other character in any medium, not just anime, what other character is at all like Ozu? He's so chaotic, so irritating, so vile, so lovable, so innocent, so animalistic. I just love Ozu so much. There he is. Here's my boy. Yeah, so I'd give this a 9.5. I think my disappointment, the only thing that kept that last 5 points, or 0.5 points, is it's not long enough. Tatami Galaxy was like a full-length series. There's only 6 episodes. I want more. It just didn't feel substantial enough. It felt like it could have gone deeper in a lot of spots. It has like that really nice self-contained, almost like short story feel, but I just want more. Yeah. And that brings us to the end of the God season. This is by far the most substantial anime video I've made. Maybe like the most substantial video I've made, period. Well, there's some that are like multi-part that are more substantial than this, but this is probably the longest, most effort single video I've made. But you know what? This season deserved it. I honestly think this is the strongest season of anime that I've seen since I started watching seasonal anime regularly, since I hopped on that treadmill in like 2011, like over 10 years ago. And but it hasn't been like consistent. There was some seasons that I basically skipped. There were some times where I wasn't watching anime very much. So I kind of wanted to like investigate this find out if this really is the God season. I was going to make a video going back through each previous season and like rating them, but no time. I don't know. I'd still kind of like to sometime in the future, but it was meant to be like a celebration of how great this season was. And of course, I cheated a little bit. There's 2 OVAs on here that just aired on streaming sites and stuff, and a movie, but whatever. But it really speaks to, I think, one of the great joys of seasonal anime, that your overall watching experience of the shows that you're watching week by week or getting caught up on or whatever varies so much from season to season, and that sometimes things can just coincide miraculously. Like when I was watching new episodes of Madoka and Nichijou every week, that it blooms into this experience that's so much more than the sum of its parts. That the weekly watching experience is just so strong, so varied. There's so many things you're looking forward to. And this one, I think it's crazy how well all the bases were covered in terms of what kind of emotional experiences I want to have from anime and how they were presented. So I made a chart. We'll look at the chart next. It's just crazy. Like, it's the feeling of it had Molcar. There's new Molcar. The Chainsaw Man adaptation was this season. And then Bocchi the Rock, which I hadn't even heard of before, was like one of my favorite shows of all time now. It's crazy. It's crazy. Even stuff I didn't watch I heard was good. Like the pretty much everyone I talked to about any show they were watching, they were just happy. Happy, happy, happy. And then the current season, less good. But that's one of the joys too. Like as I said, the work is crazy lately, and my social life is intricate. And it's like now I have so much more free time because I'm not watching like 12 shows. Yeah, I don't know. In the end, I'm like really proud of this video. I know it kind of sounds absurd because I've just been rambling on about anime for 2.5 hours, and probably for over an hour total, I talked about how much I like good production, and then the production of this video is just a slideshow with like no pictures. Well, there's some pictures, but but I'm really proud of myself. This is a lot of work. I kept plugging at it. I took long breaks from it. I was like, God damn it, I'm getting it done. I'm not letting the season leave without really breaking down how good it is. All right, so here's my chart. We have at the top more traditional production, at the bottom more experimental production, and then we have kind of more emotionally intense, and then more healing. And I think the shows that we talked about are like so nicely distributed on this. Like we get pretty much every corner covered. I don't know, it really drove home, like, not just that there was a lot of good shows, but there was like everything I needed from anime all at once. Hee-haw. Okay, that's it. 50 slides. 2.5 hours. Nice. Thank you so much for watching. Oh, I'm gonna stop talking now. I'm gonna eat dinner. Bye.